Eternity, what is it? How can a mortal imagine the endless flow of time? But for Mark Mason, eternity lasted exactly 16 years, 3 months and 17 days. It began with the gaze of his wife He-Eyes, who kissed Mark after he proposed. However, eternity was just as suddenly cut short when Mark witnessed He-Eyes exchanging loving glances and kisses with another woman in a restaurant 2 blocks from their home. At first Mark curiously observed the unfolding scene, but soon shock, disgust and anger overwhelmed him. Fleetingly he thought about a physical confrontation, but dismissed the idea, for one must not hit women. The couple immersed in their new tender relationship were oblivious, enjoying their meal and kisses. Mark, consumed by rage and helplessness, watched them as if observing a stranger's life. I was married to He-Eyes for over 14 years, with 2 exceptional years before that, he reflected. But I never suspected she was changing her orientation. The revelation of his wife's bisexuality paled in comparison to his anger over her obvious infidelity, regardless of her partner's gender. Once He-Eyes had accepted Mark's ring, he considered it the beginning of eternity. Who would have thought that some eternities have an expiration date? He bitterly smirked. After settling the bill, Mark got into his car and slowly drove home, pondering what had happened. Fortunately, he returned to his hometown earlier than planned, on a Friday evening instead of Saturday. I've been away since Monday, he thought, and besides missing He-Eyes and the kids, being without intimacy for more than 3 days in a row left me with pent-up energy that needed to be released. Mark decided to stop for dinner on his way home, and became a witness to his wife's betrayal. Their children, 13-year-old Bianca and 9-year-old Joey, could easily be left alone for the evening if He-Eyes had gone somewhere. However, Mark wondered if the girls were aware of the situation with their mother, since they hadn't mentioned anything. On the way he analyzed what he had done wrong, how long it had lasted, and sometimes his thoughts took on a sarcastic tone. At least I don't have to worry that her lover is more worthy than I am. Mark entered the house at 9 p.m., but He-Eyes was not there yet. His daughters greeted him joyfully, but he looked at them absent-mindedly, lost in anxious thoughts. When He-Eyes returned 2 hours later, she must have noticed his car and tidied herself up a bit. Mark noted a change in her behavior. She seemed less content than usual. "What are you doing here so early?" He-Eyes asked with concern in her voice. Mark playfully replied, emphasizing her surprised greeting. He-Eyes frowned slightly. "If I had known you would come home earlier, I would have prepared something tasty." There was tension in her voice. Gradually exchanging words, the spouses felt the tension in the air growing. He-Eyes continued to tell Mark that she had ordered pizza for the children, and she and had chosen wine and sandwiches in the city center. Avoiding eye contact, she casually asked if he remembered and from her former office, and if she had mentioned her before. Mark nodded affirmatively, although he understood the dishonesty of the question. Then He-Eyes sarcastically described and as a blonde with a voluptuous bust, noting the trail of admirers she left behind. He-Eyes herself could also gather a football team just by entering a room, thanks to her captivating effect not only on married women. Mark thought to himself that and possessed the charm of a goddess with her remarkable bosom. She was about 26 years old, and had just started working at the insurance company where He-Eyes used to work. The 2 women immediately became friends, and it seemed that even at 39, He-Eyes could still turn many heads. She was also a blonde with a beautiful figure and seductive curves, just 10 pounds heavier than when they first met, but still had an excellent appearance. Despite the worried expression on her face, He-Eyes was behaving calmly. Mark could barely stand on his feet, so he simply told her that he was tired and would go to sleep. She quickly pecked him on the lips as he passed by her and headed upstairs. Mark was almost certain he had tasted the flavor of love games on her lips. He went to bed but couldn't fall asleep. The children had gone to bed before him, so when he heard a quiet conversation a few minutes later, he realized He-Eyes was talking to and on the phone. The conversation was short, and soon Mark heard He-Eyes entering the shower in their main bathroom. Either he had startled her so much that she forgot about caution, or she thought he was asleep and wouldn't find out. During the rest of the weekend, Mark didn't have to interact much with He-Eyes due to children and household chores. On Saturday evening she wanted to have a family dinner, but he left abruptly, cutting the conversation short. He-Eyes must have sensed that something was wrong, as Mark rarely acted so abruptly and uncommunicative with her. On Monday morning at work, Mark asked his boss Drake for a day off due to personal problems. Having gone through a divorce and remarriage himself, Drake understood what had happened in Mark's family. Considering Mark's recent successful business trip, he didn't object to the day off, and even handed him his divorce lawyer's business card. "I regret the unexpected turn in your relationship with He-Eyes," Drake said. Mark thanked him for his understanding, and I saw a future with a long-lasting relationship with He-Eyes. Following his boss's advice, the next day Mark consulted the lawyer. She showed care for his emotions and offered gentle guidance. The lawyer was surprised when Mark decided not to hire a private detective to gather evidence of He-Eyes' infidelity. In a no-fault state, such evidence may not carry much weight, she explained. The main issue would be potential visitation rights difficulties, although I'm sure that won't be a serious problem for you. Being at home near the girls was unbearable for Mark. The minimal interaction with He-Eyes hinted that she felt it. The children also noticed the unusual silence between their parents. Mark gave He-Eyes plenty of chances to talk, but she never took the opportunity. Mark himself couldn't bring himself to start the conversation first. The situation escalated when He-Eyes was handed a summons at work the following week. Mark wanted her to experience at least a fraction of the pain he felt, which could be called revenge on his part. He assumed that she was given the summons around 12:03, because his phone started ringing continuously at 12:05. Mark ignored all 14 calls from He-Eyes and several calls from unknown numbers, suspecting that she might be using friends' phones to contact him. To his surprise, for the first time since discovering He-Eyes with, and he felt a surge of energy, and he had a surprisingly good day. When Mark arrived home at 17:35, He-Eyes' car was already in the garage. She didn't immediately hide her presence, expressing anger. "How dare they hand me this summons in front of my friends and colleagues?" He-Eyes exclaimed. Mark remained silent until he entered the house and put his things down. In the living room, the girls seemed engrossed in a movie on the big screen. "I wanted you to be served the summons along with your lover, for your own comfort," he calmly said. He-Eyes' anger turned into tears. Mark countered. "What do you know about Anne? You were not careful at all." He asked her 2 questions. "How long did your relationship last? And when were you planning to tell me?" He-Eyes admitted. "It lasted about 6 months. We were planning to tell you soon." In less than 30 seconds, her behavior changed from venomous to defeated. She wearily sat down at the kitchen table. Mark walked to the bar, took a bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon, poured himself a double glass, and sat across from her. If looks could kill, He-Eyes would have died in the first 2 seconds. Mark watched as she couldn't tear her eyes away from the table. "How could I not know about your bisexuality all this time?" he asked quietly. "I only found out about it recently myself," replied He-Eyes. "It just happened, I didn't plan it." Finally she looked at him. "This shouldn't change anything between us. I love you, but I need to explore this new aspect of myself. Please support me and give me time," He-Eyes requested. "Isn't 6 months enough for your exploration?" Mark asked in surprise. "If you truly love me, then remember our vows and don't even consider such an idea. Fidelity transcends gender." "But true love can forgive a mistake," He-Eyes retorted. "One time is a mistake, but 6 months is a conscious decision." Mark answered fervently. "Love doesn't give you the right to break my heart and jeopardize our family. Your actions have nothing to do with gender, you're just self-centered." "You're whining," He-Eyes parried. Mark doubted her love. "Now you love me as a child, a friend, or a pet, but not as a man." Perhaps these words were spoken in haste, he had poor self-control. When He-Eyes denied this, Mark shouted. "Stop! I know what I saw and I know you better than anyone." She looked guilty, realizing that Mark had seen them with and together. He-Eyes quickly tried to salvage the situation, but Mark stood his ground. "That doesn't change the fact that you love someone else, not me. Everything could have been different if it was a man, then I could have talked to him. Can't we be civil?" He-Eyes asked. Of course, Mark acknowledged the painful truth. "But in that case, my wife was stolen by her female lover, the woman you fell in love with." Several months later, Mark found out that the children knew nothing about He-Eyes' affair. They thought Aunt Anne was just a close friend of their mother. The children saw them kissing and tenderly touching each other, but since Anne was a woman, they didn't find anything reprehensible in it. Mark found out about it when one evening they went out to dinner with the children, and the kids mentioned that Anne started being home more often after he moved out. It seemed like they were starting to suspect that Anne was one of the reasons for their parents' divorce. Since they lived in a no-fault state, Mark and Hei's finances were practically split evenly. He had to pay child support. Hei's got the house until the kids went to college, and Mark of course had to pay child support for their upkeep. He moved to an apartment 15 minutes away from the former home. Honestly, Mark was completely crushed. After the divorce, they stayed in touch through the children. The girls were involved in many school and extracurricular activities, and Hei's and Mark tried their best to support them as much as they could. For some reason, Hei's stubbornly resisted the divorce, and the process dragged on for a whole year before they finally finalized it. Mark behaved politely no more when he encountered Hei's and Anne at their daughter's events. He was always invited to family gatherings, but knowing that Hei's would be there, he would apologize and leave. Mark understood that he was missing out on wonderful family memories, but he had to make huge efforts to maintain composure around Hei's and Anne. Instead, he arranged separate days for the children to give them gifts on their birthdays and Christmas. As expected, each of them kept friends they had before the marriage. Almost all the friends they made after the wedding stayed with Hei's. Many of them somehow feel awkward around you, considering that you lost your wife to another woman, one of the husbands explained to Mark. The general opinion was that Mark somehow deserved it, and some of their mutual married friends expressed this opinion directly. Mark let them go without a fight, because as the old saying goes, in difficult times you find out who your true friends are. By his own choice, Mark didn't date much in the following years. His heart, of course, was not ready for this, and he did not require much social interaction. After a year of solitude, he went to the local animal shelter and adopted a 3-year-old German Shepherd. "I want to see the 3 dogs that have been with you the longest," Mark asked the staff. The one he chose had been at the shelter since she was a puppy, but after numerous rejections, she became a quiet, withdrawn animal with the saddest eyes Mark had ever seen. "We were kindred spirits because we were both rejected," he reflected. The dog's name was Bob, not a cute name, just Bob. Bob caught Mark and Mark caught Bob. After inspecting the apartment, Bob climbed onto the couch with Mark and curled up next to him. Bob got along well with the girls Mark sometimes invited over, but it seemed he enjoyed it most when they were alone. The dog loved going for walks or rides with Mark, and they could discuss anything. True, Bob mostly stayed silent during these conversations, but Mark could tell from his expression and ears that the dog was listening attentively. Several years later, Mark's eldest daughter Bianca met a guy from Boston in college and married him. Since Mark had succeeded in his career as an engineer, he could afford to give his daughter a dream wedding. He proudly walked her down the aisle, but after the ceremony, Bianca reproached him for messing up his only line. "I realized it during the rehearsal, but in the actual moment, my voice faltered," Mark admitted. Instead of saying the expected "her mother and I," he simply replied "I" when asked who gave Hei's away. "I was almost choked up with emotion," he explained the reason for the slip. Sitting next to Hei's, Bianca quietly remarked, "That was awful and you knew it." And, sitting next to Hei's, boldly stared at Mark. "Forget about it," he quietly told her, checking to see if the pastor noticed their exchange of remarks. Wedding ceremonies always evoked memories in Mark, and at first he warmly remembered his own wedding. But it didn't last long. After 30 seconds, he pictured Hei's and Anne together in the restaurant when he found out about their relationship. Coming out of his reverie, Mark noticed Hei's looking sadly at him. She blushed and quickly looked away. Apparently, she too was lost in memories. Although Mark wasn't trying to observe, he noticed that Hei's and Anne were having a great time with Bianca, her husband Jerry, and practically all the other guests. Then Mark realized that he was one of the few lonely people over 50 in the room. Feeling sorry for himself, he approached the open bar and ordered a glass of 18-year-old Irish whiskey. Taking his glass, Mark sat at his table and quietly patted himself on the back for orchestrating such a grand celebration. 3 years later, Mark was once again to play the role of the father of the bride when his younger daughter Joey got married. This time he decided not to go alone and finally made a concerted effort to meet someone. Returning home from a 3-day trip 3 weeks later, Mark stopped at a small bar restaurant about an hour's drive from his apartment. Although he usually avoided such places because of his dislike for country music, the barbecue pork advertisement enticed him to go in. The food was excellent, and when the DJ starts playing music around 8 in the evening, Mark looked around for someone to chat with. And then, a 30-year-old African-American woman of stunning beauty appeared at the door. Why is such an attractive unmarried young lady alone in this bar? Mark wondered to himself, acknowledging that he himself was just an old man. Knowing that she was probably too young for him, he still motioned to the bartender. "Whatever this lady orders, put it on my tab." The bartender informed the woman that her drink was paid for, and she approached Mark's table to thank him. "My name is Jody," she introduced herself when Mark invited her to sit down. To his surprise, Jody sat down next to him. After a pleasant evening, Jody unexpectedly suggested going to her place. Without hesitation they headed towards the exit, but a man in a cowboy hat approached Jody and lightly kissed her on the cheek. "This is my husband, Fred," Jody reassured the bewildered Mark. "Maybe he'll join us and watch." Fred smirked, looking straight at Mark. "Something is clearly amiss in this situation," Mark expressed his discomfort. "I belong to a different generation, and cannot grasp modern quirks." He raised his hands indicating that he was ending the conversation, and walked towards his car. In another attempt to find company, Mark turned to his church. He got along well with Sharon, a 50-year-old divorced woman with long black hair, tall chest, long legs and a big smile. After a few dates they returned to Mark's apartment, which led to intimacy. However, during the intimate moment, Sharon started muttering her ex-husband's name, JC. The situation escalated when she began shouting his name loudly at the peak of pleasure. "I'm not JC," Mark immediately stopped, explaining the reason. In response, Sharon expressed sincere displeasure. "Why did you stop?" In a silent atmosphere, Mark drove her home and of course they never met again. For the next date, Mark invited his colleague Margaret Webb for an evening of food and dancing. The lively 44-year-old divorced brunette with a large chest and voluptuous figure had been a longtime friend in the office. By that time they both knew each other's sad stories. After several wonderful meetings, they made love for the first time and sincerely enjoyed each other's company. Anticipating his daughter's wedding, Mark invited Margaret to be his companion. She reacted seriously. "I'm not sure it's worth accompanying you to your daughter's wedding, considering your family situation with your ex-wife. You'll need approval from Bob, my 45-pound partner, a German shepherd with exquisite taste," Mark joked. "If Bob doesn't approve of you, you won't come with me to the wedding," Margaret laughed. But after Bob approved of her, she agreed to be Mark's companion, much to the joy of his daughter. However, Heisey seemed displeased, constantly throwing disapproving glances at Mark. Since he had little interaction with his ex-wife, he ignored her opinion, but it worried Margaret, sensing Heisey's animosity. At the rehearsal dinner, Mark finally confronted Heisey directly. "What's the problem?" "I don't like your Girl Scout," Heisey sarcastically replied, expressing contempt towards Margaret. "Jealousy doesn't suit you," Mark retorted. "Margaret, UN and our peers. Besides, you traded me for a younger female version." Heisey smirked, involuntarily acknowledging her ex-husband's wit. A year later, Margaret became Mark's second wife and life went on. Truth be told, he had completely forgotten that he was on the bone marrow donor registry when he received a call at work informing him that after 30 years, he could be a donor for someone. Delighted at the opportunity to save someone's life, Mark knew that the bone marrow extraction would be somewhat uncomfortable, but his heroic nature made him willingly agree to the procedure. Additional testing was required, and if successful, the extraction would be scheduled for 2 weeks later. Giving his consent, he told them he was ready. Although Mark wasn't very religious, he believed in God, and there were old words about God working in mysterious ways. He didn't think much about it until a week later when he spoke on the phone with his eldest daughter, Bianca, during their weekly conversation. "Dad, Aunt and found a suitable bone marrow donor," Bianca reported. "Mom and her are very happy and actively involved in the process." Mark asked Bianca to convey his best wishes to Anne and his ex-wife Heisey, despite the pain he had caused them. "You're an adult now and can contact them yourself," Bianca warned. "The less I talk to them, the less likely I am to say something unpleasant that I will regret later," Mark replied. Bianca urged him to make peace with the divorce, emphasizing that he had been happily married to Margaret for almost 2 years. Mark acknowledged his happiness but shared that although he no longer hated Heidse, she was not among his close friends. He decided to send her flowers with good wishes for a speedy recovery. Later, as he was ordering the bouquet, a thought struck Mark: the rarity of bone marrow tissue identity, and the coincidence that and found a donor around the same time seemed too convenient to him. Recognizing the anonymity in the donation process, he pretended to be optimistic and asked his contact at the registry how likely it was that his donor lived in the same city. She hesitated and admitted that it was the first time someone had identified a donor by coincidence. Mark realized that he would most likely be donating bone marrow to Heidse. Angered by the situation, he pondered how Heidse had stolen his wife, never apologized, and now expected him to save her life. Mark decided that it wouldn't happen. 2 days later, he called his secretary and said he was refusing to donate. She almost cried. "Is there any specific reason why you refused?" she asked anxiously after a pause. "You understand that although you have the right to refuse, it is almost never done and will cause great concern. I apologize for causing horror, but it is in my own interests to refuse," Mark replied. She muttered that she regretted it and told him to call her if he changed his mind. Margaret was furious when Mark told her he had refused to donate, without explaining that he had found out who the donor was. "You are a good person and always do the right things," she exclaimed. "Backing out in this case is wrong." Later, Margaret organized a family dinner with Heidse and the sick Anne. Mark was clearly the only one who did not know about the meeting. When everyone gathered, he asked who would speak first. Margaret, who organized the meeting without his consent, Daisy, who broke his heart many years ago, or Anne, who stole a married woman and now needed a chance at life. At these words, Mark looked at each woman in turn. Bianca took the initiative. "Dad, I understand your anger towards Mom and Aunt Anne, but refusing to donate bone marrow is a childish and petty act beneath you. Seeking revenge by depriving someone of a chance at life is wrong. It involves a person's life, not a frivolous act." Mark took a sip of whiskey and shook his head. "Every action has consequences. Daisy and Anne never expected such serious consequences, but now they want to shift their problem onto me. I have been given an unexpected opportunity to make changes in the life of the one who wronged me. For me, it's a way to restore self-respect. How much can there be if helping the one who stole my wife survive?" And tried to look him in the eyes. "I beg you, don't let me die. The chances of survival are slim if you don't donate bone marrow." But Mark was firm. "No, that will not happen. I will not do anything to help this woman." Daisy burst into tears. Margaret whispered, "I will try to talk to him." Mark took the keys and left while the women cried. He did not return for 3 days, ignoring Margaret's calls and the children. When he came back, the house was empty. Margaret had left with some of her things. Mark also packed a suitcase and left the engagement ring on the kitchen table. 3 days later at work, Mark received an anonymous call, which turned out to be from Margaret. "Are our relationship really ending because you acted like the biggest idiot?" she asked incredulously. "And are you surprised that I'm married to someone who completely undermined my trust?" Mark parried. "We both could have fixed the situation, and if anyone sought revenge, it was not me but perhaps a higher power." He quoted a biblical saying, "Vengeance is mine and I will repay." Mark criticized Margaret for her actions and noted that she behaved disgustingly. And passed away 2 months after their official divorce, and Mark learned about it from an obituary in the local newspaper. He did not keep track of her affairs, and none of his daughters kept him informed. Despite the estrangement from his daughters after the confrontation, Mark stood firm in his conviction and position not to help Anne, and neither he nor his girls backed down. He was confident that he had made the right decision for himself. Mark was never tormented by guilt for not giving Anne his bone marrow. The bone marrow registry did not quite understand Mark's individual situation, and completely crossed him off the list. This suited him just fine, as the likelihood of finding a second compatible donor was extremely low. His old dog Bob was a bit grumpy and displeased with the women Mark brought home over the past year, but after 60 he wasn't really looking for a third wife. However, to his surprise, Mark still received his share of intimacy. He learned that at this age, there were about 4 times more suitable women than men, and if they were in good health, they willingly agreed to nighttime fun. Of course, they couldn't frolic too vigorously anymore, after all, no one wanted to break a hip. But most of the time, both partners enjoyed spending a pleasant evening together. Mark jokingly referred to his temporary girlfriends as beautiful elderly she-wolves. Mark had not spoken to anyone in his family for over 4 years. When his youngest daughter, Jo, called to inform him that He-Eyes had passed away a few days ago, she thought her father should know and invited him to the funeral. Mark and He-Eyes had 16 years of life together and 2 children, so he decided it was worth at least attending. Perhaps he will be able to improve his relationships with the girls. At the funeral, Mark sat alone on the side. The ceremony went well. After it, he approached the daughters and their families. The girls timidly hugged him, their husbands shook his hand, and the grandchildren greeted him shyly. They went to the nearest restaurant to talk. About 3 minutes later, Bianca broke the silence. Why was Aunt Anne allowed to die? She sharply asked, and Mark noted that the tone of the conversation hadn't changed in 4 years. Anne was a thief of other women, and this will be the last time we discuss this issue. He cut her off. Changing the subject, Mark pointed to a young man at the bar. Imagine if he kissed Bianca. What would you do, Jerry? I would cause him definite harm, Jerry replied without hesitation. And if there was an affair between him and Bianca? He would be dead, declared Jerry. Then you wouldn't have to worry about bone marrow donation for him if he got sick, Mark remarked. I didn't partly save Anne's life because she was a woman. Perhaps it was a mistake, but I shouldn't have saved the life of a man connected to my wife or who stole her. Jerry nodded in agreement, and Mark saw understanding reflected in the eyes of those present. I'm not proud of my decision, but I'm not ashamed of it, he said quietly. And didn't deserve my compassion after stealing the love of my life. But how could you lose compassion for someone you once loved? Joey asked. I truly loved your mother deeply, Mark admitted. But when she broke my heart, much of that love turned into hatred. I was just a man with my weaknesses, not a monster as she portrayed me. Her fate and the fate of her friend did their work. Tears welled up in the eyes of the adults present, and the children looked puzzled. Mark realized they would all need time to come to terms with it. He suggested not dwelling on the past as life goes on.
Now start second story.
It was just another typical morning. I squinted against the bright sunlight filtering through the curtains as I slowly blinked my eyes open. Carla was already out of bed, the faint sound of the shower running in the bathroom. I dragged myself out from under the warm covers and shuffled to the kitchen to start the coffee maker. As the rich aroma filled the air, I couldn't help but smile a little. Simple routines like this were the comforting constants in our lives together. Carla emerged from the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her body. Morning, she said with a quick peck on my cheek before heading to the closet. Morning, I replied, handing her a steaming mug. I watched as she carefully applied her makeup, catching her eyes in the mirror. We used to share those lingering morning looks, full of tenderness and intimacy. Now they seemed distant, distracted. My gaze drifted to the treadmill sitting in the corner of our bedroom, covered in laundry waiting to be folded. Carla's new fitness obsession has taken over our lives lately. I swear half our paycheck went towards trendy activewear and supplements these days. Don't forget, I'm going to the gym after work again, Carla mentioned as she slipped into her pencil skirt. Pal said we're going to really push it today. I frowned at the mention of her personal trainer's name. Kyle Thompson always rubbed me the wrong way with his cocky attitude and bulging muscles straining against his tank tops. Something about the way he looked at Carla made me uneasy. You've been going every single day, I pointed out. Don't you think you're overdoing it a bit? Carla rolled her eyes. You just don't get it. This is important to me, Mark. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'll see you tonight. I watched her leave, that nagging feeling of doubt tugging at me again. Downing the last of my coffee, I tried to shake it off. I'm just being paranoid. I told myself Carla would never. Would she? I tapped my pen against my desk, struggling to focus on the lines of code in front of me. The uneasy thoughts about Carla's sudden gym obsession kept creeping back into my mind, distracting me. Finally giving up on being productive, I texted my best friend Nick. Hey man, you got a minute to grab a coffee? Need to run something by you. Nick's reply was instant. Sure thing, buddy. Meet you at the usual spot in 15? I grabbed my jacket and headed out, feeling relieved to have an excuse to break from staring at my computer screen. The coffee shop was fairly empty in the mid-afternoon lull. Nick was already there with 2 steaming mugs waiting when I slid into the booth across from him. What's eating you? He asked frankly after taking a sip. I shook my head, suddenly feeling a bit silly for letting my imagination run wild. It's probably nothing. It's just Carla has been crazy about this new gym routine lately. Nick raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah. Good for her. Right. Isn't that what you wanted? Well yeah, at first. I admitted. But she's been going for months now, spending hours there every single day, and I haven't noticed any actual changes to her body or fitness level. Huh. Nick leaned back, stroking his chin. That is a bit weird when you put it like that. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated. I don't know, maybe I'm just being paranoid, but the whole thing seems off, you know? Like she's hiding something from me about where she really is all those nights. Nick gave me a concerned look. You think Carla's playing you, bro? Cheating on you? I felt my stomach twist into a knot at his blunt words. No way, we've been married for 10 years, man. Carla's not like that. Well, there's one way to find out for sure, Nick said with a shrug, taking a long sip of his coffee. You gotta do some digging. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, watching Carla disappear into the bright neon sign of the gym. Hulk's House of Fitness. I checked my watch, 6:15 p.m. She was right on schedule. Part of me still couldn't quite believe I was actually going to go through with this crazy idea of staking out and following my own wife. But Nick's words kept echoing in my head. Look man, if Carla really is just at the gym like she says, no harm done, he'd reasoned. But if she's lying and hooking up with some side piece behind your back, don't you want to know the truth? The truth. I'd always prided myself on being a straight shooter, someone who valued honesty above all else. If Carla really was deceiving me like this, as much as it would crush me, I needed to uncover it. The minutes ticked by excruciatingly slowly as I waited in the deserted parking lot. At exactly 8:15, the gym's lights went out and the doors locked up. I felt my heart start to race as employees began filtering out one by one. But there was no sign of Carla. Then I spotted a familiar figure emerge from the side door. That was unmistakably Kyle, Carla's arrogant personal trainer. My breath caught in my throat as Carla stepped out right behind him. They paused for a moment, looking around almost furtively, before turning and heading down a dimly lit path that led into the woods lining the back of the parking lot. A small park, if I remembered correctly from passing it on my way home each day. Without a second thought, I threw the car into drive and began tailing them from a distance, leaving my headlights off. They walked for what felt like miles before finally stopping in a secluded clearing surrounded by tall trees. That's when I watched in horror and disbelief as Kyle pulled Carla into a passionate embrace, crashing his lips against hers hungrily. She responded eagerly, her hands roaming over his muscular back as he laid her down on the grass. I felt ball rise in my throat as I watched them begin to undress each other between desperate, sloppy kisses and frantic gropes. My wife, my Carla, with that slimy meathead that I'd had a bad feeling about from day one, shaking with rage and fighting back angry tears, I pointed my phone towards them and hit record, capturing every graphic detail as they coupled together like horny teenagers in the shadowy glade. So this was what she'd been doing all those nights, cheating on me with her trainer, all while lying straight to my face over and over again. By the time they'd finished and started redressing, I felt numb, completely hollow inside, a walking corpse. I waited until they left the clearing and headed back towards the parking lot before I shakily pulled out and drove home in a trance, the video still playing on loop through tears that wouldn't stop falling. Our 10-year marriage, my forever, my everything, exposed as a lie, and I had the proof. The next day, I decided to confront them in front of everyone at the gym. I waited in the shadows of the gym parking lot, my heart pounding. Right on schedule, Carla's car pulled in. A few minutes later, Kyle's truck arrived as well. They got out, probably thinking they were being discreet as they stole furtive glances around before heading inside together. Fury burned through me as I watched them brazenly walk in without a care in the world, as if they weren't both lying, betraying spouses. I took a deep breath and steeled myself as I marched towards the entrance, clutching my phone tightly. This wasn't going to be pretty, but they brought this on themselves. The gym was nearly empty, just a few diehards sweating away on the equipment. I spotted Carla and Kyle in the corner stretching mats, their bodies uncomfortably close as usual. Well, 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 I called out loudly, unable to hide the bitterness dripping from my voice. Don't you two make just a perfect couple? Carla's head whipped around, her eyes going wide with shock. Mark, what are you doing here? Showing you both the truth you've tried so hard to hide, I growled, holding up my phone to display the incriminating video. You want to explain what the hell this is? Kyle puffed out his chest defensively. Hey man, whatever you think is going on. Shut up. I cut him off sharply. Just shut the hell up. I saw everything with my own eyes. Both of you. Going at it like animals out in that park. Carla's face turned beet red as her mouth opened and closed wordlessly. She looked ill. Mark, please. It's not what it looks like. She finally managed to sputter out weakly. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at the footage in mute horror. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Things just got so out of control. Out of control. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head in disgust. Is that what you call sleeping with your trainer behind my back? You lied to me every single day for God knows how long. Let me explain. Kyle tried to interject, but I wasn't having any of it. You. I wheeled on him, getting right in the smug meathead's face. You're nothing but a walking bag of steroids and protein shakes. Did you really think you could steal my wife from me and I'd never catch on? Mr. Whitman, what on earth is going on here? I turned to see a concerned-looking middle-aged woman rushing over, Rachel Evans, according to the name tag on her staff shirt. Probably the owner. You ought to take a look at what two of your employees have been up to, I said coldly, holding up the video for her to see. Care to explain this? Rachel's jaw dropped as the explicit images played out right before her eyes. Her face turned nearly as red as Carla's as she sputtered in disbelief. Kyle. Carla. Is this for real? She gasped out. In public like that? With a client? I could see the shame and embarrassment washing over Carla as she stared at the floor, unable to meet Rachel's accusing gaze. That's grounds for immediate termination. Rachel shouted, rounding furiously on Kyle. You're fired, you piece of trash. Get out of my gym right now before I call the police for public indecency. Kyle opened his mouth to protest, seeming to shrink an inch or two under the force of Rachel's wrath. But one icy look from me and he simply turned and slunk away, leaving the gym in disgrace. I fixed my eyes back on Carla, shaking my head slowly as she broke down into sobs. Carla. I started, steadying my voice with effort. I want you out of the house by tonight. We're done. No, Mark, please, she cried, grabbing my arm desperately. I'll do anything, I swear. We can work through this, I promise. I pulled my arm away from her touch, unable to bear it a second longer than necessary. Work through this? You cheated on me, Carla. With him. I jabbed an accusing finger back towards the entrance Kyle had slithered out of in disgrace. Our whole marriage, everything I thought I knew. It was all a lie. I'm so sorry, she sobbed brokenly. I never meant to fall for him. Things just spiraled so far out of control before I knew what was happening. Her excuses rang hollow in my ears. I was past the point of caring about her reasons or justifications. Sorry doesn't cut it, I stated flatly, already beginning to turn away and put this nightmare as far in the rear view as possible. Not this time. I tossed my duffel bag onto the couch in Nick's living room with a heavy sigh. He set a beard down in front of me, giving me a look of sympathy. Hell of a day, huh? Was all he said. I nodded numbly, unwrapping the condensation-soaked bottle and taking a long pull. The cool liquid did little to dull the ache that consumed me from the inside out. I can't believe she was lying to me like that for who knows how long. I muttered, mostly to myself, how could someone I loved and trusted so completely just stab me in the back over and over like that? Nick shook his head, seeming as mystified as I was. I don't know what to tell you, man. What she did was totally messed up. You were right, I acknowledged bitterly. You tried to warn me something was off and I didn't want to see it. My thoughts turned to the confrontation at the gym I just endured. The shock and shame etched on Carla's tear-stained face as I condemned her with that video footage. Her pleading, desperate cries for me to forgive her. In that moment, any scrap of love I'd still harbored for her shriveled up and died. 10 years of my life, one beautiful love story after another. All tainted with ultimate deceit. She asked me to give her another chance, I revealed, staring down into the depths of my beer bottle unseeingly. But even watching her whole world fall apart in front of her, I felt nothing. Just empty. Nick laid a comforting hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Mark. Don't beat yourself up over still having some feelings for her at one point. The lying bitch threw away the best thing she ever had. She wanted a place to stay tonight, but I told her not to bother coming back to the house. I relayed, taking another swig of beer. I couldn't spend another night under the same roof as her lies. Good, Nick stated firmly. You gotta start cutting her out completely, man. She chose to nuke your entire marriage herself. Numb though I felt at that moment, one thing was growingly increasingly clear. I was going to fight. Tooth and nail if I had to. Because no matter how much it hurt, I was done being the poor sap who let his lying, cheating snake of a wife take him for granted, while she carried on with that asshole trainer. She wanted to be with Kyle so damn bad. Fine, she could have him, and everything that came with shacking up with that arrogant piece of human garbage. My jaw set in grim determination as I started mentally preparing myself for the war to come. Because I sure as hell wasn't going to give that bitch a damn thing else besides the humiliation and misery she deserved. I took a few calming breaths to steady my hands before raising my fist to knock firmly on the crisp green door in front of me. Within moments it swung open to reveal a slim blonde woman looking to be in her late 30s, a polite but confused smile on her face. Can I help you? She asked hesitantly. I steeled myself, clutching the damning evidence in my other hand. Are you Jenna Thompson? Recognition flickered in her eyes and her brows knitted together apprehensively. Yes. Who are you? My name is Mark Whitman, I began, noticing her frown deepen slightly at the unfamiliar name. I'm afraid I have some upsetting news regarding your husband, Kyle. Her eyes went wide with sudden worry, and I could see her mind racing through all the awful possibilities. I put her out of her misery with grim finality. He's been having an affair with my wife. I raised the phone, thumb hovering over the play button, and I have proof. The color drained from Jenna's face as the video began, her eyes frozen on the graphic images of our spouses coupled together in throes of passion. Her hand flew to cover her mouth, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from the sickening violation playing out right before her eyes. By the time the clip had ended, tears were streaming silently down Jenna's cheeks. I felt a pang of sympathy for the poor woman. She seemed just as blindsided by her husband's infidelity as I had been with Carlos. Oh my God. She finally whimpered, looking up at me with anguished eyes. How could he, after everything? I said nothing, keeping my features impassive despite the churning anger I could feel deep in my gut. How many times had I asked myself that very same question over the past excruciating day? Jenna pulled herself together with plain effort, straightening up and meeting my gaze steadily. I could see the strength there, the fire blazing behind her eyes. She was a woman scorned, same as me. Thank you for showing me the truth, she stated. Her voice regained its resolve. I don't know how you found out or why you're telling me this, but I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Whitman. I gave her a grim nod of acknowledgement. I thought you deserved to know what kind of lying, cheating scumbag you've been married to. She let out a shaky sigh, glancing briefly back towards the interior of the house behind her. Kyle and I have been together for years, since college. We have 3 kids. My eyebrows shot up in surprise. 3 innocent young lives caught up in this messy web of adultery now too. Just another consequence of their selfish actions. I'm so sorry, I murmured, truly meaning it. As furious as I was with Kyle, I really did feel awful for Jenna and her children, none of whom deserve this. She waved off my condolences, her jaw setting in a look of grim determination that I recognized from seeing in my own mirror. Don't be. This is on Kyle and your wife, not us. Jenna drew herself up taller, looking every inch the commanding figure of a woman who wasn't about to just sit and take this injustice lying down. "Starting today, I'm going to fight with everything I have," she declared, pure steel in her voice. "I want full custody of our children, and I'm taking that bastard for half of everything he's worth. Maybe more." After putting me through this humiliation, I felt a rush of profound respect for this woman I had just met. She was already mapping out her campaign against Kyle with a ruthless precision that shamed my own lack of planning thus far. "Listen," I heard myself replying gruffly, "you're going to need all the evidence and documentation you can get, right? For the divorce proceedings." Jenna gave me a curious look but nodded grimly. "Anything that shows what a lying, cheating snake he really is." "Why?" A hard smile twisted my lips as I held up my phone, letting the weight of my words really sink in. "Then you'd better hold on to this little video." I sat back in my desk chair, cracking my knuckles as I prepared to hit send and let the wildfire begin. The video was edited down to the most salacious, indisputable money shots: Carla and Kyle undressing in a frenzy of unbridled lust, their mouths locked together in a passionate lip lock. Finally, the graphic, climactic images of them coupled as one, grunting like animals in the throes of their depraved desires. Even watching it again, I felt my face burn with rage and humiliation all over again. They had brought this on themselves, but that fact didn't make the gut punch of heartbreak any less brutal. The caption line beneath the video reads simply, "In case anyone was wondering why Carla Whitman and Kyle Thompson are getting divorced." I took a deep, steadying breath and hit share. Within seconds, notifications began blowing up my phone. The video was out in the world, careening through cyberspace like a toxic virus. A staggering amount of views, likes, and comments began piling up at a dizzying rate. My mouth twitched in a cold smirk as I scrolled through the names of those who had been tagged, ensuring they'd see everything. Carla's parents, her friends and coworkers, Kyle's gym members and family members. My finger hovered over one final send button before releasing the next payload. The video link, shared directly to Carla and Kyle themselves. Let them watch their humiliation go nuclear in real time. Almost immediately, my phone started ringing. Just as quickly, I declined Carla's call and blocked her number. Next came a tongue lashing from Carla's mother, punctuated by a wave of furious texts, lambasting me for airing such filth rather than dealing with things privately and discreetly. I tuned it all out, snapping my laptop closed with a self-satisfied smirk. Too little, too late. They should have thought about keeping things discreet, before so eagerly disrespecting the sanctity of our marriage vows. In that moment, letting the flames of hatred and vengeance burn was all that mattered. Anything to inflict on them, even an ounce of the pain and public shame they'd put me through. Their reputations were being incinerated in front of the whole world, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I sat back and soaked in the cleansing heat of their misery, giving zero fucks. "Oh my God, Kyle. What the hell have you done?" Jenna's shrill cry from the living room made me look up from the open briefcase spread across my lap. I tilted my head, narrowing my eyes in consternation as the commotion only grew more frantic. As if on cue, my phone buzzed to life with an incoming FaceTime request. Frowning, I accepted it, only to be greeted by the tears-stained, hysterical faces of Carla and Kyle looking utterly shattered. "Mark, please, you have to stop this." Carla blubbered desperately. Beside her, Kyle's cocky swagger was nowhere to be seen, his expression one of abject terror. "It's gone way too far, man. You're ruining us." I blinked slowly, letting their panicked blubbering over me as I took in every delicious detail of their disheveled, disgraced demeanors. Fair was fair. They'd ruin me every bit as much. "So you've seen the video then," I commented coolly, leaning back on the couch with a bemused expression, catching on pretty quickly just how unforgivable your actions were, I'd say. "Mark, I'm begging you." Carla wailed, makeup streaking down her splotchy face. "Give me one more chance, please. I swear I'll spend every day proving how sorry I am." "Sorry," I scoffed, shaking my head in utter disbelief. "For lying? The cheating? The betrayal? You disrespected me and disgraced our marriage in the worst way imaginable. What could you possibly say that would make any difference now? We made a horrible mistake." Kyle chimed in, looking as pathetic and small as the groveling worm he was. "But we want to make things right, man. Isn't that worth anything to you? I stared at them, my mouth a hard line. The sheer audacity of their pleading struck a bitter chord deep within me. Make things right, I echoed, laughing mirthlessly. By what? Expecting me to just forgive and forget after you spit in my face and burn my life to the ground? Carla flinched as if I'd struck her. Good. She deserved that and more after her wanton disregard for my trust, my commitment, my love. We lost our way. We were so stupid and selfish, she sobbed, sounding utterly broken. Maybe once that would have moved me to sympathy. But not anymore. Not after watching her greedily consuming every inch of Kyle's disgustingly muscled frame. Not after hearing her desperate moans of pleasure as he rutted on top of her in the throes of their lusty affair. This goes way beyond some silly mistake, I stated coldly, pinning them with an icy glare. What you did was conscious, deliberate, selfish betrayal. And for that there is no forgiveness. No second chance. Their faces crumbled with the finality of my words. Clearly that was the last thing they'd wanted to hear, though why they'd even entertained any other possibility was beyond me. What's done is done, I said with an air of grim satisfaction. The whole world now knows what kind of lying, cheating snakes you both really are. Maybe next time you'll think twice before stabbing someone in the back like that again. Without another word I disconnected the call, blocking their numbers for good measure. There was nothing left to say to either of them that wouldn't have been a waste of breath. Carla was out of my life permanently, just like I'd vowed. As for Kyle, well, thanks to the grainy footage that had already gone viral across the internet, he was well on his way to being just as disgraced. I couldn't keep the thin smile off my face as I reopened my briefcase, reviewing the divorce papers and ironclad evidence against Carla one final time. Everything had fallen into place perfectly. I was retaining all assets and capital after the divorce, while Carla would be left with nothing, completely fitting for the lying snake that had burned me so selfishly. Even better, my new friend Jenna had quickly made good on her vow to take Kyle to the proverbial woodshed in their own divorce proceedings. Sole custody of their kids, a huge chunk of his assets and income, he was being flayed in the way he deserved. As I signed my name on the dotted line with a crisp flourish, I felt a profound sense of relief and vindication wash over me. Justice, sweet justice, had been served. In the wake of betrayal and ashes, I was finally free to start fresh and rebuild from the ground up. Maybe someday the scars would fade, and I could open my heart again to someone worthy of the love I had to offer. But that was then and this was now. After the war Carla and Kyle had unleashed, for today I would allow myself to simply bask in my hard-won victory. The weight lifted off my shoulders as the judge made his final ruling was indescribable. I held my head high, offering Jenna a reassuring nod as we stood and gathered our things. In the back of the courtroom, I couldn't help but steal one last glance at the miserable hunched forms of my soon-to-be ex-wife and her disgraced boy toy. They looked utterly defeated, crushed beneath the ramifications of their own selfish choices. Jenna pulled me aside, both of us delaying the urge to break into wide smiles until we were outside. I could see the sheer elation shining in her eyes, mirroring my own sense of overwhelming relief. We'd done it, not just survived their betrayals, but triumphed over them in overwhelming fashion. Our unfaithful spouses had been left with virtually nothing, the desperately craved consequences of their sins. "Thank you," Jenna murmured, squeezing my hand gratefully, "for everything, Mark. I couldn't have done this without you." "We made it through hell," I agreed with a weary nod. Reaching up, I placed my free hand over hers, holding on for the briefest of moments. A silent acknowledgement of our shared struggle. There would still be plenty of healing to work through, but the sheer emotional weight already felt infinitely lighter. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace and resolution settle over me. The nightmare was finally over. Justice had been served. Ahead of me stretched an empty road, filled with potential and rich with possibility for a fresh start. A new journey to begin piecing myself back together and rediscover who I was always meant to be. I smiled thinly, giving Jenna's hand one last comforting squeeze before letting go. With a deep cleansing breath, I turned to face that wide-open horizon, ready to embrace the next chapter of life. After everything, I was finally able to let it all go and move forward again. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen and I will see you there.
Now start second story.
The moment I stepped into our house, I knew something was wrong. The air felt stale, heavy with an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. "Jennifer?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. "I'm home." No response. I frowned, dragging my suitcase behind me as I made my way to our bedroom. The door was locked. "Jen, are you in there?" I knocked, a sinking feeling in my gut. "Is everything okay?" Silence. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door. The room was immaculate, as if no one had been there for days. On the bed lay a manila envelope. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing a stack of papers. Divorce papers. What the hell? I muttered, flipping through the pages. This had to be some kind of sick joke. I pulled out my phone, dialing Jennifer's number. Straight to voicemail. "Jennifer, it's me. I just got home and…" "What's going on? Call me back, please." I hung up, my mind reeling. We'd been happy, hadn't we? Sure, things have been a little strained lately with my long hours at work, but divorce? This came out of nowhere. A thought struck me and I rushed to my laptop, logging into our joint bank account. My blood ran cold. Empty. Every last cent gone. I slumped onto the bed, my world crumbling around me. What was happening? I needed answers and I knew just who to call. 20 minutes later I was sitting in a dimly lit bar, nursing a whiskey I hadn't touched. Sebastian slid into the booth across from me, concern etched on his face. "Asher, what's going on? You sounded pretty shaken up on the phone." I looked up at my best friend, his retired cop instincts already kicking in. "Seb, I don't even know where to start." "The beginning's usually a good place," he said, signaling the bartender for a drink. I took a deep breath. I got home from my business trip and found divorce papers on the bed. Jennifer's gone and so is all our money. Sebastian's eyes widened. "All of it?" I nodded, running a hand through my hair. "Every last penny from our joint account. I can't reach her, can't find her. It's like she vanished into thin air." "Have you called the police?" I shook my head. "And tell them what?" "My wife left me and took our money. For all I know, she could have been planning this for months." Sebastian leaned back, his brow furrowed in thought. "This doesn't add up, Ash. Jennifer's always seemed so devoted to you." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, appearances can be deceiving, I guess." "Look," Sebastian said, leaning forward. "I may be retired, but I've still got some contacts in law enforcement. Let me do some digging. See what I can find out." Hope flickered in my chest. "You do that?" "Of course, man. You're my best friend. We'll get to the bottom of this." I nodded, grateful for his support. "Thanks, Seb. I need to know what happened." "Have you told Kendall yet?" "My sister." I groaned, realizing I'd completely forgotten to call her. "No, I haven't." "God. She's going to flip." "Call her," Sebastian urged. "She's got resources we could use. That TV show of hers might come in handy." I pulled out my phone, dreading the conversation. Kendall picked up on the second ring. "Asher, how's my favorite brother?" "I'm your only brother, Ken," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She must have sensed something was off. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. "Jennifer's gone. She left divorce papers and emptied our bank account." "What?" Kendall's voice rose an octave. "Are you serious? Where is she?" "I don't know. That's why I'm calling. I need your help." There was a pause on the other end. "I'm on my way." "Where are you?" "O'Malley's with Sebastian." "Give me 20 minutes." The line went dead. I looked at Sebastian, who was watching me intently. "She's coming," I said. Sebastian nodded. "Good. We'll need all the help we can get." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. My mind raced with questions. How long has Jennifer been planning this? Was our entire marriage a lie? True to her word, Kendall burst through the bar doors exactly 20 minutes later. She spotted us and made a beeline for our booth. Her face is a mix of concern and determination. "All right," she said, sliding in next to me. "Tell me everything." I recounted the events of the day, my voice hollow as I described coming home to an empty house and a stack of divorce papers. Kendall's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't sound like Jennifer at all. Something's not right here." "That's what I said," Sebastian chimed in. "I'm going to use my old contacts to see what I can dig up." Kendall nodded. "Good. I'll do some digging of my own. My show's got a pretty extensive research team. We'll find out what's going on, Ash. I promise." I looked between my sister and my best friend, overwhelmed by their support. "Thanks, guys. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Hey," Kendall said, squeezing my hand. "That's what family's for. We've got your back." Sebastian raised his glass to find the truth. We clink our glasses together, a small moment of solidarity in the chaos that had become my life. As we sat there planning our next moves, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple divorce. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and sleepless nights. Sebastian had been working his contacts in law enforcement, while Kendall had her research team digging into Jennifer's past. I was left feeling helpless, pacing around my empty house and jumping every time my phone rang. It was on the fourth day that everything changed. I was sitting in my home office, staring blankly at the computer screen, when my phone buzzed. It was Sebastian. "Ash, you need to come to my place. Now." His tone sent a chill down my spine. "What is it? Did you find something?" "Just get here as soon as you can. Kendall's on her way too." I didn't bother changing out of my sweatpants and old t-shirt. 10 minutes later I was knocking on Sebastian's door. He ushered me in, his face grim. Kendall was already there, pacing the living room. She stopped when she saw me, her expression a mix of anger and pity. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. Sebastian gestured for me to sit. "We found some information about Jennifer." My heart raced. "Is she okay? Did something happen to her?" Kendall let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, she's fine. Better than fine. Actually," Sebastian shot her a warning look before turning back to me. "Asher, there's no easy way to say this. We've uncovered evidence that Jennifer, well, she's done this before." I blinked, not comprehending. "Done what before?" Kendall couldn't contain herself any longer. "She's a con artist, Ash. A professional gold digger. You're not her first victim, and I doubt you'll be her last." The room seemed to spin. I gripped the arms of the chair, trying to steady myself. "What are you talking about?" Sebastian pulled out a file and spread its contents on the coffee table. "We found records of at least 3 previous marriages, all to wealthy men. Each time she drained their accounts and disappeared." I stared at the documents, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. There were marriage certificates, divorce papers, bank statements, all with Jennifer's name or variations of it. "No," I muttered. "This can't be right. There must be some mistake." Kendall knelt in front of me, her eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Ash. But it's true. We've cross-referenced everything. The Jennifer you knew, she doesn't exist." I felt like I was going to be sick. "But why me? I'm not. I mean, we're comfortable, but I'm not exactly a millionaire." Sebastian cleared his throat. "Actually, that's the other thing we discovered. Your recent promotion, the one that's had you traveling so much? It put you in a whole new tax bracket. We think she was waiting for that before she made her move." The realization hit me like a truck. All those late nights at the office, the missed dinners, the business trips. I thought I was building a better future for us. Instead, I was just fattening up the prize for her to steal. "There's more," Kendall said softly. "We have reason to believe she's already moved on to her next target. A real estate developer named Rick Thompson." I felt a surge of anger, hot and unfamiliar. "We have to stop her. We can't let her do this to someone else." Sebastian and Kendall exchanged a look. "We're working on it," Sebastian said, "but we need to be careful. She's clearly very good at what she does." I stood up, pacing the room. I want to confront her, make her face what she's done. Asher, no, Kendall said firmly. That's exactly what we can't do. If we tip her off, she'll disappear again. We need to be smart about this. I ran my hands through my hair, frustration and betrayal warring inside me. So what do we do? Sebastian leaned forward. We build a case, gather evidence, and then we expose her not just to the police but to the public. Make it impossible for her to do this to anyone else. Kendall nodded. I can use my show to get the word out. Once we have enough concrete evidence, we'll do a special expose. I looked between them, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. You really think we can do this? We have to try, Sebastian said, for you and for all her other victims. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Okay, where do we start? Kendall stood up, a determined glint in her eye. First, we need to get your story out there. Generate some public interest. I want you on my show, Asher. We'll tell your side of the story, hint at the bigger revelations to come. I hesitated. I don't know, Ken. I'm not sure I'm ready to go public with all this. You have to, she insisted. It's the only way to draw her out, to let her know we're onto her game. Sebastian nodded in agreement. Kendall's right. We need to make some noise, get people talking. It might even bring other victims forward. I rubbed my face, feeling the weight of the past few days. And you really think this will work? It's our best shot, Kendall said softly. Trust me, Ash. I know what I'm doing. I looked at my sister, saw the determination in her eyes, and knew I had to take the leap. All right, I said finally. I'll do it. Kendall smiled, a fierce, protective expression. Good. We'll film tomorrow. Sebastian, can you get in touch with your tech guy? What's his name? Owen. Sebastian nodded. Yeah, Owen. Good thinking. We'll need his expertise to track Jennifer's digital footprint. As they began to plan, discussing strategies and timelines, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at Jennifer's betrayal, fear of what was to come, but also a growing sense of resolve. We were going to expose her, to stop her from hurting anyone else. For the first time since I'd walked into that empty house, I felt a spark of something like hope. Whatever Jennifer had planned, whatever game she was playing, we were going to beat her at it. As I left Sebastian's place that night, my mind was racing with everything we discovered and everything we were about to do. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face it. The morning of Kendall's show, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie for the 10th time. My hands shook slightly as I smoothed down my shirt. You ready for this? Sebastian's voice came from behind me. I turned to face my friend. As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, stick to the plan. Share your story but don't reveal everything. We want to keep Jennifer guessing. I nodded, taking a deep breath. What if she sees it and disappears? That's why we've got Owen, tracking her digital footprint. If she makes a move, we'll know. The drive to the studio was quiet. As we pulled into the parking lot, I felt my stomach churn. Asher. Kendall waved us over as we entered the building. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to throw up on live television. She squeezed my arm. You'll do great. Just be honest and let me guide the conversation. In the makeup chair, I tried to calm my nerves. Sebastian stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye. What if I freeze up? I asked. You won't, Sebastian reassured me. Just tell your story. The truth is on your side. Before I knew it, I was seated across from Kendall under the bright studio lights. The producer counted down and we were live. Good morning, Sacramento, Kendall began. Today we have a special guest. My brother Asher Hardaway is here to share a deeply personal story of betrayal and deception. She turned to me. Asher, can you tell us what happened? I swallowed hard. A few weeks ago, I came home from a business trip to find my wife gone. She'd left divorce papers and emptied our joint bank account. That must have been devastating, Kendall prompted. It was. I thought we were happy. I never saw it coming. And what have you discovered since then? I leaned forward. I've learned that the woman I married isn't who I thought she was. There's a pattern of deception that goes beyond just me. Kendall nodded. Can you elaborate on that? Not fully, not yet. But I can say that I'm not the first person she's done this to, and I'm determined to make sure I'm the last. The interview continued, with Kendall skillfully guiding the conversation. By the end, I felt drained but oddly empowered. As we left the studio, Sebastian's phone buzzed. It's Owen, he said, answering. Yeah, we just finished. Any updates? I watched Sebastian's face as he listened. Got it. Keep monitoring. We'll meet you later. What did he say? I asked as Sebastian hung up. The interview's already trending. Owen set up alerts for Jennifer's name and known aliases. If she reacts, we'll know. Back at my place, we gathered in the living room. Owen arrived shortly after, laptop in hand. Alright folks, Owen said, setting up his computer. Let's see what we've got. He pulled up a series of graphs and charts. The interview's blown up. It's all over social media. People are sharing their own stories of betrayal, speculating about Jennifer. Has she made any moves? I asked. Owen shook his head. Not yet. But if she's smart, she's laying low. Kendall paced the room. We need to keep the momentum going. Asher, how do you feel about making a video? I blinked. A video? Yeah, Owen chimed in. Something more personal than the interview. Really pull at people's heartstrings. Sebastian nodded. It could work. The more public sympathy we generate, the harder it'll be for Jennifer to hide. I ran a hand through my hair. I don't know. Isn't the interview enough? Trust me, Owen said. In today's world, you need to go viral to make a real impact. Kendall sat beside me. I know it's a lot, Ash, but think about all the people Jennifer's hurt. All the people she might hurt in the future if we don't stop her. I sighed, knowing they were right. Okay, what do I need to do? Over the next few hours, we crafted the video. Owen set up lighting and coached me on delivery. By the time we finished, I felt emotionally drained. That was perfect, Owen said, reviewing the footage. Raw, honest. People are going to eat this up. When do we release it? I asked. Tomorrow morning, Kendall said. Prime time for social media engagement. As everyone packed up to leave, Sebastian hung back. You okay? He asked once we were alone. I shrugged. I don't know. This all feels surreal. I know, but we're making progress. We're going to bring her down, Ash. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing non-stop. The video had been posted an hour ago, and it was already going viral. I scrolled through the notifications, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. People were sharing their own stories, offering words of encouragement, demanding justice. A call from Kendall came through. Ash, have you seen the numbers? It's insane, I said. I had no idea it would blow up like this. This is exactly what we needed. The pressure's on Jennifer now. She can't hide forever. As the days passed, the story gained more traction. News outlets picked it up, and soon I was fielding interview requests from across the country. Through it all, Owen kept a close eye on Jennifer's digital footprint. She's gone dark, he reported during one of our meetings. No activity on any known accounts or aliases. That's good, right? I asked. It means she's running scared. Sebastian shook his head. It means she's being careful. We need to be prepared for her to fight back. Kendall leaned forward. Which is why we need to move to the next phase. We've got public opinion on our side. Now we need hard evidence. What are you thinking? I asked. A live TV special, she said, her eyes gleaming. We'll present all the evidence we've gathered, interview some of Jennifer's other victims. Really nail her to the wall. I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. And you think that'll be enough to bring her in? Sebastian nodded. With the public pressure and the evidence we've gathered, she'll have nowhere to hide. As we began planning the TV special, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling. What if Jennifer had one last trick up her sleeve? What if we were underestimating her? The night of the live TV special arrived. I paced backstage, my heart pounding. Kendall approached, adjusting her earpiece. Are you ready for this? She asked. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied. Any word from Owen? Kendall shook her head. Nothing yet. But don't worry, we've got eyes everywhere. Sebastian appeared, his face grim. Show's about to start. Remember, stick to the plan. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Let's do this. The lights dimmed, and I heard Kendall's voice boom through the studio. Good evening, Sacramento. Tonight, we bring you an explosive expose that will shock our city to its core. I watched from the wings as Kendall introduced the show, laying out the basics of my story. Then it was my cue. Please welcome my brother, Asher Hardaway. I walked onto the set, the bright lights momentarily blinding me. As I sat across from Kendall, I could feel the tension in the room. Asher, Kendall began, you've been through quite an ordeal. Can you tell us what's happened since we last spoke? I leaned forward. Well, Kendall, what started as a personal betrayal has turned into something much bigger. We've uncovered a pattern of deception that spans years and affects multiple victims. And you have evidence to support these claims? We do. I nodded. But before we get to that, I think it's important for people to hear from some of Jennifer's other victims. Kendall turned to the camera. We've reached out to several individuals who claim to have fallen prey to Jennifer's schemes. Let's hear from them now. The screens behind us lit up, showing faces of men I'd never met but whose stories mirrored my own. She seemed so genuine. One man said, his voice cracking. I never suspected a thing until it was too late. Another chimed in. By the time I realized what was happening, she drained my accounts and disappeared. As the testimonies continued, I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at what Jennifer had done. Relief that I wasn't alone. Kendall turned back to me. Asher, hearing these stories, how does it make you feel? Honestly, it's overwhelming. But it also strengthens my resolve. We need to stop her from hurting anyone else. And that brings us to the evidence we've gathered, Kendall said. Owen, can you walk us through what you found? Owen appeared on screen, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by focused professionalism. Of course, Kendall. We've compiled financial records, marriage certificates and divorce papers that show a clear pattern of fraud. He began displaying documents on the screen, walking the audience through Jennifer's trail of deceit. As you can see, Owen continued, Jennifer, or whatever her real name is, has been operating this scam for years. She targets wealthy individuals, marries them, drains their accounts, and then disappears. I watched as the evidence mounted, each piece adding to the weight of Jennifer's crimes. It was overwhelming to see it all laid out like this. Kendall turned to me. Asher, seeing all this evidence, how do you feel about your relationship with Jennifer now? I took a deep breath. It's hard, Kendall. Part of me still wants to believe it was real. But the evidence is undeniable. Our entire relationship was built on lies. And what would you say to Jennifer if she were watching right now? I looked directly into the camera. Jennifer, if you're out there, it's over. You can't hide anymore. Turn yourself in and face what you've done. As the show continued, Sebastian's phone burst. He discreetly made his way to me during a commercial break. We've got movement, he whispered. Owens tracked her to a hotel on the outskirts of town. My heart raced. She's watching. Sebastian nodded. Looks like it. And she's spooked. Owen says she's booking a flight out of the country. I turned to Kendall, who was getting touch-ups from the makeup team. We need to wrap this up. Jennifer's on the move. Kendall's eyes widened. Are you sure? Positive. Sebastian cut in. We need to move now if we want to catch her. Kendall nodded, turning to her producer. We're cutting the show short. Family emergency. As Kendall made her closing statements, Sebastian and I slipped out the back. Owen was waiting in a car outside. Where to? I asked as we jumped in. Owen's fingers flew over his laptop keyboard. She's heading east. Probably trying to reach the airport. Sebastian started the car. Not if we have anything to say about it. We sped through the streets of Sacramento, Owen providing real-time updates on Jennifer's movements. She's stopped, Owen announced. Looks like a cabin. About 30 miles outside the city. Sebastian pressed harder on the gas. She's cornered. Let's end this. As we approached the cabin, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. What would I say when I saw her? How would she react? We pulled up to the cabin, the headlights illuminating a rental car parked out front. She's definitely here, Sebastian said, drawing his gun. Stay behind me. We approached the cabin cautiously. Suddenly the door flew open and there she was. Jennifer, the woman I thought I knew. The woman I had loved. Asher, she gasped, her eyes wide with shock. What are you doing here? I stepped forward. It's over, Jennifer. We know everything. She glanced between us, her mind clearly racing. Then her expression changed, softening into the look I'd fallen for so many times before. Asher, baby, you don't understand, she pleaded. I can explain everything. I felt a familiar pull, the desire to believe her. But I steeled myself, remembering all we'd uncovered. No more lies, Jennifer, I said firmly. It's time to face what you've done. She took a step towards me, her hand outstretched. Please, Asher. You know me. You know I love you. Sebastian moved between us. That's enough. Jennifer, you're under arrest. As if on cue, police sirens wailed in the distance. Jennifer's face fell, the mask of innocence slipping away. You'll never prove anything, she spat, her voice cold and unfamiliar. I shook my head. We already have. It's all out there, Jennifer. Every lie, every scam. The police cars pulled up, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. As they cuffed Jennifer and led her away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger, and oddly a sense of closure. Sebastian clapped a hand on my shoulder. You did it, man. It's over. I nodded, watching as the police car carrying Jennifer disappeared down the road. Yeah, it's over. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The story of Jennifer's arrest made national news, with Kendall's show at the center of it all. More victims came forward, strengthening the case against her. I sat in my lawyer's office, staring at the divorce settlement in front of me. This is more than fair, my lawyer said. Given the circumstances, the judge was quite sympathetic to your case. I nodded, signing the papers. What about the money she stole? A good portion of it has been recovered. It'll be divided among the victims, yourself included. As I left the office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just about the money. It was about closure, about finally being free from Jennifer's web of lies. I met Sebastian at our usual bar that evening. He raised his glass as I sat down. To justice, he said. I clinked my glass against his. To new beginnings. Sebastian leaned back. So, what's next for Asher Hardaway? I took a sip of my drink. I'm thinking of moving. Fresh start, you know? Where to? Seattle, I said. I've always liked it there. Plus, it's about as far from all this as I can get without leaving the country. Sebastian nodded. I'll miss you, man. But I get it. You need this. What about you? I asked. Any big plans? He grinned. Actually, yeah. I'm opening my own PI firm. This whole experience made me realize how much I missed the work. I smiled, genuinely happy for my friend. That's great, Seb. You'll be amazing at it. As we sat there talking about the future, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in months. The betrayal still stung. The wounds were still fresh. But for the first time I could see a path forward. The next morning I stood in my empty apartment, the last of my boxes packed and ready for the move. Kendall arrived to see me off. Are you sure about this? She asked, helping me load the final box into my car. I nodded. I need a fresh start, Ken. But don't worry. I'll visit often. She pulled me into a hug. You better. And call me when you get there, okay? As I drove out of Sacramento, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the fight for justice. It had been the hardest period of my life, but I'd survived. More than that, I'd come out stronger. I thought about Jennifer, now facing the consequences of her actions. Part of me still couldn't reconcile the woman I'd loved with the person she'd turned out to be. But I was done dwelling on the past. It was time to look forward. The Welcome to Seattle sign appeared on the horizon. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of excitement and possibility. This was more than just a new city. It was a new chapter, a chance to redefine myself on my own terms. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was eager to find out. As I crossed the city limits, I smiled to myself. The journey had been tough, but it had led me here. To a new beginning, full of promise and hope. The betrayal that had nearly broken me had instead become the catalyst for change. And as I drove into my new life, I realized that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen and I will see you there.
Now start second story.
The bell rang, signaling the end of another school day. I gathered my papers, nodding goodbye to the last few students shuffling out of my classroom. 20 years of teaching high school English and the routine never changed. But lately that routine had become a lifeline, the only constant in a world that felt increasingly off-kilter. I drove home, the same route I'd taken for years. The modest two-story house came into view, a home that once held dreams and warmth. Now it felt like a facade, much like my marriage to Sylvia. Sylvia, even her name left a bitter taste in my mouth. We drifted apart, two strangers sharing a space. Her dreams had outgrown our simple life, while I remained content with what we'd built together. Or so I thought. I entered the quiet house, noticing Sylvia's purse on the counter. She must be upstairs. I loosened my tie, heading to the kitchen for a much-needed drink. That's when I saw a crumpled receipt peeking out of her purse. Normally I wouldn't pry, but some instinct maybe made me reach for it. As I smoothed out the paper, my heart sank. The Regal Hotel, a luxury suite, booked by Alejandro Meyer. Alejandro, the name echoed in my mind. The charming architect who'd been hanging around Sylvia lately. I'd seen the way she looked at him, but I'd dismissed it as harmless admiration. Clearly I'd been a fool. I clutched the receipt, my knuckles white. The front door opened and Sylvia's voice rang out. "Gordon, you're home early." I turned, facing her as she entered the kitchen. She looked radiant, her dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders. But now all I saw was deception. "What's this?" I held up the receipt, my voice steadier than I felt. Sylvia's eyes widened for a moment before narrowing. "You went through my things? Answer the question, Sylvia." She laughed, a sound that cut through me like glass. "Oh darling, are you jealous?" I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This creature before me was a stranger, cold and cruel. "Jealous?" I repeated, my tone flat. Sylvia sauntered closer, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "You should be. Alejandro knows how to treat a woman. He doesn't bore her with talk of lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences." "So you're admitting it? You're having an affair?" She shrugged, reaching for the receipt. I pulled it away and her eyes flashed with anger. "What did you expect, Gordon? Look at you, a high school teacher with delusions of grandeur. Alejandro is going places. He can give me the life I deserve." Each word was a dagger, but I refused to show her how deeply they cut. "And what life is that, Sylvia? One built on lies and deceit." She laughed again, the sound grating on my nerves. "Oh please, spare me the moral high ground. You're just upset because you can't satisfy me anymore." I took a step back, suddenly seeing our entire marriage in a new light. Every late night, every secretive phone call, it all made sense now. "How long?" I asked, my voice low. Sylvia smirked, clearly enjoying my pain. "Long enough. And tonight I'm meeting him again. He's booked the penthouse suite. Don't wait up, darling. I'll be too busy being treated like a queen." She turned to leave, but I grabbed her arm. "Sylvia, think about what you're doing. We can work this out." She yanked her arm away, her eyes cold. "Work what out? There's nothing left to save, Gordon. You're pathetic, clinging to this sham of a marriage. I want more, and Alejandro can give it to me." I watched her walk away, my world crumbling around me. The front door slammed, and I was left alone in the silence of our once happy home. Hours passed. I sat in the darkness, the receipt still clutched in my hand. As the night wore on, my shock turned to anger, then to a cold, calculating rage. Sylvia had made her choice. Now it was time to make mine. I grabbed my keys and wallet, leaving behind the house that no longer felt like home. I spent the night in my car parked at the school, my mind racing with plans. Sylvia wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd soon learn that I wasn't the pushover she thought I was. As dawn broke, I made my decision. Sylvia had shattered our life together. Now I would shatter her illusions of grandeur. And I would do it without mercy. The bank opened at 9 a.m. sharp. I was the first customer through the door. My resolve was already strong by a sleepless night of planning. "Good morning, Mr. Mayo." The teller greeted me with a smile. "How can I help you today?" I forced a pleasant expression. "I need to make some changes to my accounts." 30 minutes later I walked out. Our joint account emptied and Sylvia's credit cards cancelled. It was amazing how quickly one could dismantle a life built over decades. Next stop, the lawyer's office. I'd called in a favor with an old friend who owed me. By noon I had divorce papers drawn up, the ink still wet on the signature line. Back at the house I gathered a few essentials. Clothes, important documents, the woodworking tools that had been my solace over the years. As I packed, my eyes fell on our wedding photo. Sylvia's smile, once so captivating, now seemed like a mask hiding the deceit that had always lurked beneath. I placed the divorce papers on the kitchen table, along with a note. "Queen of the streets now. Enjoy your pauper's palace." Short, cruel, and to the point. Just like her betrayal. As I loaded my car, Mrs. Henderson from next door called out. "Everything all right, Gordon?" Sylvia left in quite a hurry last night. I plastered on a smile. "Just fine, Mrs. Henderson. Sylvia's visiting a friend. I'm heading out for a bit myself." The lie came easily. "Let Sylvia deal with the fallout when she returns." I drove to a motel on the outskirts of town, checking in under a false name. As I settled into the sparse room, my phone buzzed. Sylvia's name flashed on the screen. I declined the call, a satisfaction settling over me. Hours passed. My phone lit up repeatedly with calls, texts, voicemails. I ignored them all, imagining Sylvia's panic as she discovered her new reality. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I listened to the first voicemail. "Gordon. What the hell have you done?" Sylvia's voice was shrill, panicked. "The cards aren't working. The account's empty. Call me back immediately." I deleted it without a second thought. The next message played automatically. "This isn't funny, Gordon. You can't do this to me. Oh. I'll tell everyone what a controlling bastard you are. You'll regret this." Her threats washed over me, leaving me cold. She'd already taken everything that mattered. What more could she possibly do? The final message was different. Alejandro's smooth voice filled the room. "Gordon. It's Alejandro. Look, I know you're upset, but let's handle this like men. Call me back and we can discuss this civilly." I laughed bitterly. Civilly? As if there was anything civil about stealing another man's wife. I deleted all the messages, then blocked both their numbers. Let them stew in their own mess. As night fell, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the blank TV screen. The initial rush of revenge was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache, but I pushed it aside. This was just the beginning. Sylvia and Alejandro thought they'd played me for a fool, but they'd soon learn that I was capable of so much more than they'd ever imagined. I pulled out my laptop, fingers flying over the keys as I began to plan the next phase of my retaliation. Sylvia had connections in this town, friends in high places, but I had something far more valuable. 20 years of quiet observation and a mind for strategy that no one had ever bothered to notice. By dawn I had a plan. It wasn't enough to just walk away. No, I would dismantle their world piece by piece, just as they'd shattered mine. The next few weeks passed in a blur of calculated moves and quiet manipulations. I'd return to work, playing the role of the dedicated teacher by day, but in the evenings I set my plan in motion. It started small. A concerned comment to a mutual friend over coffee. "I'm worried about Sylvia. I confided, my voice low. She's been under so much stress lately, acting erratically. Sarah, always eager for gossip, leaned in. Oh. How so? I sighed. The picture of a concerned husband. Mood swings. Impulsive behavior. I'm trying to be supportive, but. I trailed off, letting her imagination fill in the blanks. Sarah patted my hand. Poor dear. Both of you. I'll keep an eye on her, make sure she's okay. I nodded gratefully, hiding my satisfaction. The seed was planted. At school, I overheard two teachers discussing local architects for a home renovation. What about Alejandro Meyer? One asked. I've heard good things. I couldn't resist. Careful with that one, I warned, keeping my tone casual. I've heard he's got a reputation for getting overly involved with his clients, especially the married ones. Their eyes widened, and I knew the rumor would spread like wildfire. Weeks passed, and I watched as my carefully orchestrated whispers took root. Sylvia, once the darling of our social circle, found herself increasingly isolated. Invitations dried up, friends became distant. And Alejandro? His golden boy reputation began to tarnish. I ran into Sylvia at the grocery store, her cart filled with cheap wine and TV dinners. She looked haggard, her designer clothes wrinkled. Gordon, she hissed, grabbing my arm. What have you been saying about me? I gently removed her hand, my face a mask of confusion. I haven't said anything, Sylvia. Are you feeling all right? You look unwell. Her eyes narrowed. Don't play innocent. My friends are avoiding me. Alejandro's clients are canceling. This has your fingerprints all over it. I shrugged, keeping my voice level. Sounds like you're having a rough time. Maybe you should talk to someone about that paranoia. She opened her mouth to retort, but I was already walking away, leaving her fuming in the frozen food aisle. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Jocelyn, a local influencer and one of Sylvia's closest friends, approached me after a school event. Gordon, can we talk? Her voice was hushed, her eyes darting around nervously. I nodded, leading her to a quiet corner. What's on your mind, Jocelyn? She bit her lip. It's about Sylvia. I'm worried about her. She's been saying some concerning things. About you. I raised an eyebrow, the picture of innocence. Oh. Jocelyn looked uncomfortable. She's talking about exposing you. Says you're abusive, controlling. But Gordon, I've known you both for years. It doesn't add up. I let out a heavy sigh. Jocelyn, I appreciate your concern. Sylvia's been going through a lot lately. I'm afraid she's not thinking clearly. So it's not true? I met her gaze steadily. What do you think? She studied me for a moment, then nodded. I thought as much. Don't worry, Gordon. I won't let her spread these lies. As Jocelyn walked away, I allowed myself a small smile. Sylvia's last desperate attempt to turn the tables had backfired spectacularly. That night, I sat in my new apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand. My phone buzzed with a news alert. A local gossip column had run a story about a scandalous affair between a prominent architect and a married woman. No names were mentioned, but the implications were clear. I raised my glass in a mock toast. Checkmate, my dear. The game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But as I watched Sylvia and Alejandro's carefully constructed world crumble, I felt a surge of satisfaction. They'd underestimated me. Dismissed me as a simple, naive teacher. Now they were learning just how wrong they'd been. I sat at my desk, grading papers, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Another post from Jocelyn, Sylvia's influencer friend. I clicked on it, my jaw clenching as I read. Sometimes the strongest women are the ones who suffer in silence. #stay strong, #hidden truths. I scrolled through the comments. People were already speculating, some even mentioning Sylvia by name. Jocelyn was playing her part well, I had to admit. A knock on my classroom door interrupted my thoughts. It was Principal Hawkins. Gordon, got a minute? I nodded, gesturing for him to enter. Of course, sir. What can I do for you? Hawkins closed the door behind him, his expression grave. There's been some talk. About you and Sylvia. Is everything all right? I met his gaze steadily. Sylvia and I are going through a divorce. It's unfortunate, but these things happen. That's not all I'm hearing, Gordon. There are rumors. I cut him off. With all due respect, sir, my personal life is my own business. I can assure you it won't affect my work here. Hawkins studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right, but if you need anything. I appreciate that, I said, effectively ending the conversation. As soon as Hawkins left, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Hello. A gruff voice answered. Frank. It's Gordon Mayo. Remember that favor you owe me? Frank chuckled. How could I forget? What do you need? Teach. I smiled. I need you to dig up some dirt on Jocelyn Carter, the social media influencer, and I need it fast. Consider it done. I'll call you when I have something. I hung up, my mind already racing with plans. Sylvia and Jocelyn thought they could destroy me with lies. They were about to learn a harsh lesson in consequences. The next day, I volunteered to chaperone the school dance. As I helped set up decorations, I made sure to chat with the students, asking about their lives, their hopes. I knew word would get back to their parents about the kind, caring Mr. Mayo. One of the students, Emily, approached me hesitantly. Mr. Mayo? Is it true what they're saying online? About you and your wife? I put on my best teacher's face. Emily, you shouldn't believe everything you read online. Sometimes people say hurtful things when they're angry or hurt themselves. The important thing is to always treat others with kindness and respect. Don't you agree? Emily nodded, looking relieved. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Mr. Mayo. As she walked away, I noticed several other students watching our interaction. Good. The seeds of doubt were being planted. That evening, as I was leaving the school, my phone rang. It was Frank. Gordon, you're gonna want to hear this. Turns out your friend Jocelyn isn't as squeaky clean as she pretends to be. I've got emails proving she's been taking payments to promote products without disclosing it. Illegal as hell. Oh, and there's more. She's been fudging her follower numbers, buying fake accounts. Her whole image is built on lies. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Send me everything you've got, Frank, and make sure it's untraceable. Already done. Check your encrypted email. I thanked him and hung up, a plan already forming in my mind. Jocelyn's campaign against me was gaining traction, but not for long. I had the ammunition I needed to bring her down, and with her, Sylvia's entire narrative. As I drove home, I couldn't help but smile. They thought they were so clever, trying to paint me as the villain. But they had no idea who they were really dealing with. By the time I was done, they'd wish they'd never crossed Gordon Mayo. The fallout was swift and brutal. I'd leaked the evidence of Jocelyn's fraudulent activities to several reputable journalists, and within days the story broke. Her carefully crafted image crumbled overnight. I was in the teacher's lounge when the news hit. The TV was on, showing Jocelyn's tearful apology video. I never meant to deceive anyone, she sobbed on screen. I got caught up in the pressure of maintaining my image. Turn that garbage off, muttered one of my colleagues, reaching for the remote. I stopped him. Wait, I think we should watch this. It's important to stay informed about the influence social media has on our students. As we watched, I noticed the sideways glances from my coworkers. They were connecting the dots, realizing that Jocelyn was the same person who'd been spreading rumors about me. After the broadcast, Sarah, the English teacher, approached me. Gordon, I owe you an apology. I may have believed some of the things I heard about you. I should have known better. I waved off her apology. No need, Sarah. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them. She nodded, looking relieved. You're a good man, Gordon. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As Sarah walked away, I allowed myself a small smile. The tide was turning. Later that day, as I was leaving school, I spotted a familiar figure storming towards me. Sylvia, her face contorted with rage. You bastard, she screamed, drawing the attention of nearby students and parents. What did you do? How did you get that information about Jocelyn? I remained calm, aware of our audience. Sylvia, I think you need to calm down. This is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. Don't tell me to calm down, she shrieked. You ruined everything. You're supposed to be destroyed, humiliated. How are you still standing? I noticed phones being pulled out, people recording the scene. Perfect. Sylvia, I said loud enough for others to hear. I'm sorry you're going through a difficult time, but making a scene like this isn't going to help anyone. Why don't we talk about this privately like adults? Her eyes widened with fury. You condescending prick. You think you're so much better than me? I'll show you. She lunged at me, her nails raking across my face. I stumbled back, shocked by the sudden attack. Mrs. Mayo, Principal Hawkins' voice boomed across the parking lot. That's enough. As Hawkins rushed over, I touched my cheek, feeling the sting of the scratches. Sylvia stood there, breathing heavily, seeming to realize what she'd done. I didn't mean. Save it, Hawkins cut her off. Mr. Mayo, are you all right? Do you want to press charges? I shook my head, playing the role of the magnanimous victim. No, that won't be necessary. I'm sure Sylvia is just upset. Perhaps she needs help, not punishment. Sylvia's face crumpled, a mix of anger and despair. As Hawkins led her away, I could feel the sympathy of the onlookers. They'd seen everything. The unhinged woman attacked the calm, forgiving teacher. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Alejandro. Gordon. His voice was tense. We need to talk. I'm listening, he replied coolly. This has gone too far. My clients are pulling out, my reputation is in tatters. Call off your dogs, Gordon. What do you want? I laughed humorlessly. What do I want? I want you to understand the consequences of your actions, Alejandro. You thought you could take my wife, destroy my life, and walk away unscathed? You're learning a valuable lesson about karma. Please, he begged, his smooth confidence gone. I'll do anything. Just make it stop. Anything. I'm used to it. All right. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to publicly admit to your affair with Sylvia. You're going to tell everyone how you manipulated her, used her, and then you're going to leave town. For good. There was a long pause. And if I do this, you'll stop. You have my word, I said, knowing full well that my campaign against him was already self-sustaining. The community would do the rest. Fine, he agreed, to feed in his voice. I'll do it. As I hung up, I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. Sylvia and Alejandro had tried to destroy me, to paint me as the villain. Instead, they'd orchestrated their own downfall. The next day, Alejandro's confession hit social media. The backlash was immediate and brutal. His business, already struggling, collapsed entirely. Sylvia, now exposed as the willing participant in an affair, found herself shunned by the very community she tried to turn against me. I watched it all unfold from a distance, playing the role of the dignified, wronged husband. The sympathy and support I received were overwhelming. People who'd once looked at me with suspicion now treated me with respect and admiration. As I stood in front of my class, teaching about the complexities of human nature and literature, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Sylvia and Alejandro had underestimated me, seeing only the mild-mannered teacher. They never realized that I could play the game better than they ever could. I thought I'd seen the last of Alejandro, but like a bad penny he turned up again. This time he came at me through the school, aiming to destroy the career I'd built over 2 decades. The first hint of trouble came when Principal Hawkins called me into his office one morning. His face was grim as I took a seat across from him. Gordon, we need to talk, he said, his voice heavy. There have been some allegations made against you. I leaned forward, my expression neutral. What kind of allegations? Hawkins sighed, sliding a folder across the desk. Misconduct, Gordon. Serious stuff. A colleague and several students have come forward with complaints. I opened the folder, scanning the contents. My blood boiled as I read the fabricated stories, the exaggerated accounts of minor classroom incidents twisted into something sinister. This is nonsense, I said, closing the folder. Who's behind this? The board is taking it seriously, Gordon. I'm sorry, but effective immediately, you're suspended pending an investigation. I stood up, my mind racing. This is Alejandro's doing, isn't it? He's manipulating people, trying to ruin me. Hawkins shook his head. I can't discuss the details. Please, Gordon, just go home. We'll be in touch. As I left the office, I saw Jared Livingston, a younger teacher I'd never been particularly close to. He avoided my gaze, hurrying past me. That's when I knew he was involved. I spent the next few days at home, fielding calls from concerned colleagues and friends. The news had spread quickly, and I could feel the tide of public opinion shifting against me once again. Then, unexpectedly, I received a visit from Marshall John, a veteran teacher and one of the few people I considered a true friend. Gordon, he said as I opened the door. We need to talk. I ushered him in and we sat in my living room. Marshall looked troubled, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by something more serious. I know you didn't do what they're saying, he began, and I think I have proof. My eyebrows shot up. What kind of proof? Marshall pulled out his phone. I overheard Jared talking to someone the other day. He sounded scared, like he was being forced into something. I recorded it. Listen. He played the recording. Jared's voice came through clearly. I can't do this anymore. It's not right. Gordon's never done anything wrong. No, you don't understand. He's threatening me, saying he'll expose. Look, I don't care about the money anymore. This has gone too far. I leaned back, a smile on my face. Alejandro. It has to be him. Marshall nodded. That's what I figured. What are you going to do? I stood up, my resolve getting stronger. I'm going to end this once and for all. Can you get me a meeting with the school board? Marshall grinned. Consider it done. The next day I stood before the school board, Marshall by my side. I played the recording, watching as their expressions changed from skepticism to shock. Mr. Mayo, the board president said after a long silence. We owe you an apology. It's clear you've been the victim of a malicious campaign. I nodded, my voice steady. I appreciate that, but I think we need to address the root of the problem. Alejandro Meyer has been orchestrating this smear campaign. He manipulated Jared and those students. I believe he should be held accountable. The board members exchanged glances. We'll look into it, Mr. Mayo. For now, consider your suspension lifted. We'll issue a public apology and clear your name. As we left the meeting, Marshall clapped me on the back. You did it, Gordon. Alejandro's finished. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Not quite yet, but he will be. True to their word, the school board issued a public apology. The community rallied around me, outraged at how I'd been treated. Alejandro, his last desperate attempt to destroy me having backfired spectacularly, went to ground. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Alejandro had tried to take everything from me. Now, I would return the favor. Despite my victory at the school, I still had one last battle to face. The divorce court. Sylvia, emboldened by the state's no-fault divorce laws, swaggered into the courtroom like she owned it. As the judge read out the settlement, I kept my face impassive. Sylvia, on the other hand, couldn't hide her glee. Mr. Mayo, as per the state laws, your wife is entitled to half of your joint assets, the judge declared. This includes your savings, pension, and property. Sylvia leaned over, her voice a venomous whisper. Hear that, Gordon? I win after all. I said nothing, merely nodding at the judge's words. Inside, however, my mind was already several steps ahead. As we left the courthouse, Sylvia couldn't resist one last dig. She strutted down the steps, her newly acquired wealth practically radiating from her. Oh, Gordon, she called back, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Don't look so glum. At least you still have your precious teaching job, though I can't imagine the pay will cover much more than a shabby little apartment now. I watched her go, my expression unchanging. Alejandro stood at the bottom of the steps, looking uncomfortable. He'd kept his distance throughout the proceedings, no doubt aware of how precarious his own position was. Sylvia reached him, linking her arm through his. Come on, darling. Let's go celebrate my newfound fortune. Alejandro hesitated, glancing up at me. I met his gaze coolly and he quickly looked away. Actually, Sylvia, I have a meeting, maybe another time? Sylvia's face fell, but she quickly recovered. Fine. More for me then. As they walked away, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Martin. It's Gordon. Remember that favor you owe me? I'm calling it in. Martin Maynard, a smooth-talking con man I'd once helped out of a tight spot, chuckled on the other end of the line. Well, well. The straight-laced teacher finally needs my particular set of skills. What's the game, Gordon? I outlined my plan, watching as Sylvia climbed into a taxi, no doubt headed for the nearest luxury boutique. Can you do it? I asked. For you, Gordon? Consider it done. This Sylvia won't know what hit her. Over the next few weeks, I watched from afar as Martin worked his magic. He approached Sylvia at her favorite upscale bar, playing the part of a successful entrepreneur to perfection. I sat at the other end of the bar nursing a drink, as Martin regaled Sylvia with tales of exclusive investment opportunities and promises of easy wealth. You see, my dear, Martin was saying, his charm turned up to 11. These opportunities are usually reserved for the upper echelon of society. But I see something special in you. A woman of your sophistication deserves to be among the elite.
Now start second story.
The end of spring weather can be unpredictable, and this month's unexpected rain and warmth had me mowing the lawn sooner than usual. Last year we had a blizzard around this time, so mowing early seemed like a small price to pay to avoid snow. With tax season over, it felt great to be outside. My backyard slopes down to a stream and woods, with the basement exposed at the back due to the leveled front yard. This design allows me to store lawn equipment in the basement, which I love. After mowing, I was eager to shower due to my grass allergies. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard my wife talking with her friend, which wasn't surprising, until I caught what they were saying, making me pause before opening the door. My name is Robert Crane, but everyone calls me Bob. Back in school, I got the nickname Hogan after the actor from Hogan's Heroes, even though it was before my time. I graduated with an accounting degree and earned my CPA quickly. Now, I lead a team at a large Philadelphia firm, specializing in forensic analytics to uncover fraud and money laundering. My work has even led to consulting for the FBI. I met Ashley during our junior year while she was pursuing political science and business, aiming for law school. She was tall and slender, with long strawberry blonde hair and a striking presence that captivated me immediately. Sadly, Ashley didn't sit next to me or end up in my group for any projects. It took me a month to work up the courage to talk to her. I cracked a silly joke, and to my relief she laughed. A real hearty laugh, not just a polite chuckle. We started chatting, and I asked if she'd like to grab coffee with me after class. I've been hoping you'd ask me for weeks, she said with a smile. For the last 2 years of college we were hardly ever apart. Our parents weren't thrilled at first, but we moved in together for our senior year. Eventually they saw how committed we were and got used to the idea. I thought things couldn't get any better, but they did. After graduation, I quickly secured a job at a major public accounting firm in Philadelphia. The salary was impressive for a 22-year-old just starting out. Ashley got accepted into Penn's law school, so we decided to stay in our student apartment. My company offered to cover my MBA, so I was taking classes as well. I used SEPTA for my daily commute, which made owning a car unnecessary and helped save money. 3 years later, Ashley graduated, and I proposed to her during her celebration dinner at Morton's Steakhouse in Rittenhouse Square. We were married 6 months later. Ashley took a job as a deputy district attorney in Bucks County north of Philly. We chose to buy a house in Doylestown, where the courthouse was located, and the regional rail line ended. This way I could take the train to work every day. Although the commute was 80 minutes one way, it was better than dealing with the expressway or I-95 traffic. Ashley and her mother picked out the house. It was a great starter home with 3 bedrooms. One room would be set up as an office with 2 desks, one for me since I'd be working from home occasionally, and one for Ashley's legal work. The other bedroom would be a guest room, and the last room was our master bedroom. It was also conveniently close to her parents' house, which Ashley pointed out would be handy for babysitting when we had kids. Being an only child, I always wanted siblings. Ashley and I had talked about having children since our junior year, and decided to wait until she was settled in her career. Now that we were ready, We agreed 2 nights ago to stop her birth control and start trying for a baby. I was happier than I had ever been, and that's when the sound I heard made my hand freeze on the doorknob. Ashley and I decided it's time for me to get pregnant, Ashley exclaimed with excitement. Her friend Nicole Watkins immediately reacted with an equally enthusiastic high-pitched squeal that made me think of whales stranded on the Jersey Shore trying to join in. While I stood on the stairs, I couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm, which matched my own joy at the thought of becoming a father. Just as I reached for the doorknob again, a question made my smile disappear and took away my happiness. "That's fantastic, Ash," Nicole said. "But what about Paul?" "Paul?" "Shoo," Ashley whispered urgently. "Hogan is outside mowing the lawn." There was a brief pause and I could almost picture her scanning the area waiting for me to appear. Then she continued speaking. "I've already told Paul that I'm ending things with him. He was okay with it. With Grossman stepping down from the Senate, Paul thinks he actually has a chance at the seat. Being caught having an affair with a married employee would definitely hurt his chances." Just like that, 3 sentences shattered my world. Paul Evans was Ashley's boss at the DA's office, a widower in his mid-40s. He had lost his wife and to cancer, leaving him to raise their daughter Barbara alone. Paul was deeply involved in politics, and Ashley had shared stories about his political maneuvers aimed at advancing his career. Now I realized how my wife had access to all that behind-the-scenes information. "Really?" Nicole asked. "Just quitting cold turkey? You've been involved with him for 6 months and now you're just going to walk away from him?" Her teasing tone made me want to lash out at her. I had known Nicole from Penn, and although she was now Ashley's best friend, I thought she was still my friend too. It turns out I was wrong. "Stop it," Ashley said, laughing. "You're so naughty. Paul was a great lover, but he was just a bit of fun. I love Hogan, but Paul only used me for closeness and power. There was no love, just raw desire. Now that Bob and I are planning a baby, I don't want any complications. I love Hogan, and I'm committed to being a good and faithful mother." I wondered how many more cliches we were going to have to endure. Finding a strange car in the driveway and discovering them in bed together would complete the nightmare. The urge to burst into the room and scream or to destroy everything in sight was overwhelming, but my body felt paralyzed. Stunned, I was unable to move and my heartbeat thudded in my ears. "So quitting completely?" Nicole nudged. Ashley responded with another giggle. "Not exactly cold turkey," Ashley confessed. "I have a conference with Paul in Pittsburgh next week. We'll have our final fling there. I'll miss the closeness, but Hogan and the baby are more important." I couldn't handle it any longer, but I didn't know what to do next. Loving Ashley was tearing me apart. My business instincts kicked in, and I realized I needed to step back and plan my next move. Making a loud racket on the steps, I acted like I was coming up the stairs. When I opened the door and entered the kitchen, Ashley and Nicole were sitting there with their teacups. Was there a hint of guilt on Ashley's face? "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. It dawned on me that my cheeks were wet with tears. "Allergies," I muttered. "Spring's going to be rough." "Go upstairs and take a shower," she said. "Just leave your clothes outside the bathroom, and I'll wash them right away so they don't mess up your closet. I bought you a new box of Claritin D last week, and it's in the medicine cabinet." "Thanks," I said as I headed for the stairs. I needed some time to think. The next morning was Monday, and I took advantage of an early meeting to slip out of the house before Ashley woke up. The night before, I'd used my allergies as an excuse to go to bed early because I was overwhelmed with emotions. As I rode the train, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had overheard. On one hand, my wife had been unfaithful but claimed she was ending it to stay with me and have our child. Some might say I should accept that, and be thankful she's returning to our marriage with the intention of being a good wife and mother. However, a voice in my head questioned if she might do it again in the future. Would she have another Just Act affair once the kids are in school? If that happened, a divorce would involve the kids, and Ashley would likely get custody while I'd face hefty alimony and support payments. As an accountant and business analyst, I was trained to think about risk and reward. This situation was no different. My trust in her was shattered. The excuse of Just Act overlooks the core issue. It's the utter lack of respect shown to the partner. If the cheater truly didn't think their actions would hurt the other person, they'd be open about it, and I would have known all along. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't have accepted her being with Dawn, but at least if she had talked to me about it, some respect would have been shown. Ashley's behavior demonstrated just how little she truly respected me. I went through my workday, but my mind was preoccupied with what to do next. Without solid evidence beyond the conversation I overheard, I hadn't noticed any signs of the affair over the past 6 months. Confronting Ashley directly without proof seemed risky and unlikely to yield any reward. Ashley would deny it and Paul Evans would deny it. Pursuing the case in court would be financial ruin, as every judge, politician, and lawyer in the area knew Evans. I'd be buried to protect his reputation. Leaving and starting fresh somewhere else crossed my mind. The idea was tempting, but the house would feel like a burden. Since Ashley couldn't afford it on her own and we had little equity, she'd need to sell it quickly to avoid foreclosure. In today's market, that would be nearly impossible, and it would ruin both our credit scores. As a CPA, having poor credit would make it hard to get a new job. If you can't manage your own finances, how can others trust you with theirs? Before taking any action, I needed solid proof. It was surprising where I eventually found it. 3 days later, although I was trying to stay composed, I still had no concrete evidence to support what I had overheard. Her personal laptop was clean. There were no secret email accounts, no provocative lingerie hidden away, and no suspicious receipts. Everything seemed clear. Then Ashley called me at work to say we were invited to a party at Paul Evans' home on Friday night. I figured it was his big announcement for his U.S. Senate candidacy. I was tempted to make a grand revelation, but without evidence it felt pointless. We arrived right on time for the event. Evans had a sizable McMansion near Washington Crossing with a small horse farm. A large tent was set up in the backyard for guests. When we walked in, Evans was at the head of the receiving line, acting like royalty. As a widower, he didn't have a wife to host, so he'd apparently enlisted his 21-year-old daughter to help. She greeted guests with a practiced ease. When it was our turn, Evans greeted Ashley with a broad smile, saying, "Ashley, you made it. How wonderful." He gave her a polite kiss on the cheek before turning to me. "Robert, great to see you again. I'd be lost without your wife, but I hear you'll need to let her go as soon as you start expanding the family." He laughed at his own joke. "Just make sure to return her to me when you're done, and there'll be no hard feelings." Another laugh followed. While Ashley blushed slightly, I was seething inside. His smug comment clearly had an underlying meaning that he thought I missed. "I'm not sure what the future holds," I replied in a flat, neutral tone, lacking any warmth. It was similar to how I would report audit results, professional but detached. Evans actually turned pale, and Ashley nudged me, whispering about my rudeness. Evans then smoothly moved on to the next guest, leaving us with his daughter. Though I was seething inside, I couldn't help but notice Barbara Evans, who was stunning. Her dark red hair and radiant smile reminded me of a young Maureen O'Hara. While Ashley resembled a ballerina, Barbara looked like she should be on a swimsuit calendar next to Kate Upton. With her striking looks, healthy figure, and perfect skin, she was every photographer's dream. Paul Evans had crafted the ideal political family. He appeared to be the quintessential wise statesman and family man. The death of his wife from cancer had made her the perfect martyr. Attacking her would have a political ending. Barbara, his daughter, was the perfect princess. Homecoming queen, a senior at Penn majoring in business and pre-law, a former gymnast, and now a member of the Penn cheerleading squad. According to Ashley, Barbara planned to audition for the Eagles cheerleading squad at their next open call, now that she was 21. With a saintly deceased wife and a beautiful, smart, photogenic daughter, Evans was set to win over the press. "Robert," Barbara exclaimed, hugging me warmly. This was more than a polite party hug. It was a genuine, enthusiastic embrace. Her body pressed against mine in a surprisingly pleasant way. "You look fantastic. No wonder Ashley keeps you hidden away. You never come to our parties. You should take it easier. Working too much isn't good for you." She managed to say all that in one breath. My anger shifted to complete shock instantly. I made a few polite comments about how great she looked and tried to move away. But then I realized two things. First, Barbara hadn't second, what parties was she talking about? Ashley didn't give me a chance to ask, as she quickly jumped in with her own greeting to Barbara. We had no choice but to let the next guests take their turn in line. As Ashley and I moved through the crowd, I couldn't help but wonder what Barbara knew. After getting a drink for my wife, I asked, what was Barbara talking about with all these parties? Ashley just gave a dismissive smile and snorted, "Oh, she's just being a little brat. Paul sometimes holds team meetings and strategy sessions here. He says he thinks better with a drink in hand, and you never know who might be nearby at a bar. She's been around a few times when we've met here. And don't tell anyone, but Paul let her have drinks at home even before she turned 21. That explained where it was happening. The jerk was having an affair with my wife right here at his house, under the guise of team meetings. They might even have real meetings where Ashley stayed until the end. Or maybe she left early and came back after everyone else had gone. That way, a team of lawyers would be less likely to question why Ashley stayed behind to help the boss clean up. With his wife gone and his daughter in college, he had no need for a discreet hotel room, hence no records of their rendezvous. Does Barbara attend these team meetings? I asked. Ashley brushed off the question. No, she's just been home a few times when her classes were cancelled. She's only teasing her dad about having parties during work hours. She pulled on my arm. Come on, love, let's get you a drink. For the next hour, Ashley stayed close to me, never more than a foot away. We chatted with several of her coworkers, and a few mentioned our plans to start a family. They expressed their sadness about losing Ashley for a while, but were excited for us. Honestly, it felt a bit awkward. Why did so many people know about our plans? An hour later, Paul Evans called for everyone's attention. Standing beside him with a smile was his daughter. He began by thanking everyone for attending, and then moved into his major campaign announcement. Even though it was expected, everyone acted enthusiastic. I noticed the local paper's publisher and one of his reporters taking notes nearby. It's clear this will be a major story in tomorrow's edition. I won't drag you through the rest of the party details. It could have been a pleasant evening if my heart wasn't in pieces and my mind wasn't racing, trying to find proof of what I'd heard. About 90 minutes after the big announcement, Margaret Williamson, the first assistant district attorney, came over to say that Paul wanted to meet with his staff. Margaret, who ran the office while Paul was an elected official, was the real powerhouse there. DAs changed every 4 years, but Margaret was a constant presence. Known for her toughness as well as her honesty and integrity, she was highly respected in the legal field. Ashley took the job partly because of Margaret. I liked her too. Margaret had been married for over 30 years to an electrician who supported her through college, and now ran a successful electrical contracting business. Their devotion to each other always seemed like a model for Ashley and me. Sorry to take your wife away, Hogan, Margaret said. Paul wants to go over office organization after he's done with his campaigning. Then they both left. I moved away from a small group of spouses who were left behind for the meeting and headed to the far side of the large pool, away from the party's patio. There was a wicker swing chair hanging from chains, partially in the shadows. It was visible enough that people could see me if they looked, but not so obvious that I'd stand out. It was an ideal spot for me to gather my thoughts. Less than 5 minutes after I sat down, a voice broke the silence. So this is where you're hiding, a voice said softly. Looking up, I saw Barbara sliding into the wicker swing beside me. She positioned herself facing me slightly, without me needing to say anything. Her little black dress clung to her tan thighs, subtly highlighting her figure without giving too much away. It was both alluring and innocent. The fact that I noticed this almost like an observer spoke volumes about my state of mind. You seem like you're carrying a huge burden, she said. Talking about my problems with my wife's lover's daughter was the last thing I wanted, no matter how attractive she was. We've just had a lot of audits at the office, I said, hoping to end the conversation. Really? Barbara responded, showing genuine interest. I just finished my last accounting course at school. We spent quite a few classes discussing forensic accounting and its role in law enforcement. I found it really intriguing. That caught me off guard, even in my current state. Seriously? I asked, not quite believing it. It's not exactly glamorous, she said, but it's like detective work. You sift through a huge amount of information to find the right pieces, and then piece them together to see the full picture. It's even more challenging when people try to hide the information. Most people don't see it that way, I agreed. Barbara went into great detail about what she had learned and why she found it so interesting. I was actually impressed. I've seen interns at the firm who couldn't explain the topic as well. Focusing on her words helped me push aside my anger and her looks, allowing me to slip into a mentoring role. It provided a bit of relief from my emotional distress. You really did enjoy the class, I said. You have a great understanding of the subject. Barbara blushed at the compliment. For a moment the glamorous image faded, and I saw a genuinely touched young woman. I've thought about joining the FBI after I graduate, she shared. Dad wants me to either become a prosecutor or work at one of his friend's law firms, but I'm not sure that's what I want. You should pursue your own goals rather than just following your father's path. I meant it sincerely, even though I wouldn't mind disrupting that guy's plans. I've collaborated with the FBI when audits revealed criminal activity. They're sharp professionals. Before Barbara could respond, Ashley emerged from the shadows. So this is where you've been hiding. You weren't up to any mischief, were you? She asked playfully. Barbara faced my wife with a bright smile. We were just discussing Bob's job. I recently studied it in class and wanted to hear from an expert. Hogan is definitely that, Ashley said proudly. I once read an audit report where an employee was embezzling funds using his login. Hogan figured out that transfers happened while the boss was away on a trip, but the logins were from the corporate office. Most people would have stopped there, but Hogan dug deeper. I could have secured a conviction on that employee my first day out of law school. Hogan practically did the DA's job for them. Ashley's pride in me was evident, and it threw me off. How could she be so proud and loving while carrying on a 6-month affair with her boss? My confusion must have shown as Ashley asked, "What's the matter, dear?" "Nothing," I replied, "just thinking about a problem." "Stop that. It's a party," Ashley chided me. Without missing a beat, she added, "Hogan, you won't believe the opportunity I've been given. Paul and Margaret want me to move into an administrative role before I go on maternity leave. That way when I leave, no cases will be left unresolved. I'll be working directly with Margaret." A part of me felt relieved at the thought of Ashley being away from Paul, but my hope was short-lived. "I'll need to travel occasionally," Ashley continued. "I'll be delivering sensitive documents to Paul during his campaign. I won't be involved in his campaign, but I'll still get to see some of the behind-the-scenes action. It's going to be so exciting." I felt my heart break all over again. Even though Ashley said she was ending her affair to focus on having a baby, I could easily see her slipping back into the affair once she got involved in the campaign. And if she did get pregnant, how could I be sure it was mine? Paul is about my size and looks like me. Without a DNA test, it would be nearly impossible to tell. My anger started to build up, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the moment to lose control. Barbara and Ashley started chatting about her new role in the campaign. They quickly got absorbed in their discussion, and I was left out. I used the chance to pull myself together. After tonight, I will begin making a plan. I needed a way to combat Paul's political influence, but honestly I had no idea how to start. 2 days later, the solution walked into my office. "Your 4 o'clock appointment is here," my assistant announced through the open door. We're not allowed to call them secretaries anymore. I checked my Outlook calendar and didn't see any appointments scheduled. Before I could respond, she walked in. Barbara Evans. "Hi, Hogan," she said as she entered. Her long, dark red hair cascaded down her shoulder. She wore a light sundress that highlighted her beautiful legs and sandals with straps that wrapped almost up to her knees. Her chest was modestly covered with no cleavage visible, but the fabric hugged her suggestively. The dress was held up by 2 thin straps, leaving her arms bare. I was at a loss for words as I watched her walk in. "I hope this isn't a problem," Barbara said as she shut the office door behind her. "I told Mary we were meeting to talk about my career and how Ashley works for my dad." I stood up politely. "It's good to see you. I was just working on some reports." I pointed to the chairs in front of my desk. After she sat down, I took my seat. What would you like to discuss? Barbara's cheerful expression quickly faded. I think you already know, Bob. I saw your reaction when you spoke with my awful father. I'm really sorry he's causing you trouble. I was taken aback. This wasn't what I expected at all. What are you talking about? I asked carefully. Barbara looked troubled. It's about my father having an affair with your wife. I slumped back in my chair, shocked by her directness. Did you just find out? Barbara asked softly. I nodded. I'm sorry. How? When did you find out? I inquired. About 3 months ago, Barbara said. I'm not sure when it started, but I discovered it in February. I went home early one Friday and found them having one of their meetings at our house. I was supposed to have a late lunch with a high school friend, so I just dropped by to say hello and leave. Dad asked when I'd be back and I said after dinner. Then my friend got sick and couldn't come. I picked up some lunch and went back home. That's when I saw my dad and Ashley having closeness in our hot tub. I took photos, including some of them running without clothes back into the house. There was a foot of snow outside too. You took pictures of your dad having closeness? I asked, astonished. I also wondered if I could get copies of those photos. They would be very useful for the divorce. Barbara seemed to sense my thoughts. She reached into her bag, pulled out a large envelope and set it on my desk. These are the photos from that day, plus a few extras. Barbara gave a sly smile. Dad has a security system at the house. It covers the entire outside and several rooms inside. If you have the website, key fob and password, you can access everything from almost anywhere. There's also a thumb drive with video footage. I was stunned. Paul's daughter was giving me everything I needed for both the divorce and to take down her father. Why are you doing this? I asked. Barbara's sad expression shifted to anger. Because, she said softly, I loathe that bastard more than you ever could. I stayed silent and waited. After a brief pause, she began to explain. My dad met my mom when she was a college student. He was a rookie lawyer assigned to an intimate crimes unit in Philadelphia. My mom had come from Ireland for school. Her wealthy family was killed in Londonderry, so she moved here to escape the troubles. Her tone became softer, echoing her mother's accent. Mom was dating a loser who beat her badly enough that she ended up in the emergency room. Barbara placed a thick green and lace-covered book on my desk. After her death, I found her journal and I learned she was quite submissive. She liked a strong man who took charge. This jerk pushed her too far, leading to her hospitalization. Dad was assigned to her case. They met, he sent the jerk to jail, and a year later they were married. Dad was always ambitious. He got a smart, beautiful woman with an exotic accent. Mom got a strong man who would protect her. I was born a few years later. Dad pushed me into gymnastics, thinking it would boost his political career if I made it to the Olympics. Do you know what usually ends gymnastics careers? I shook my head and replied, never really thought about it. Barbara grinned. They call it the 3 Bs. I was pushed into cheerleading and told to be the perfect all-American girl. I didn't mind performing, but by the time I was 16, I realized I was just a tool for my dad's ambitions. My mom figured it out early on. Dad was cheating almost from the start of their marriage. She knew and pleaded with him to stop, but she was too powerless to do anything. Being a staunch Catholic, divorce was not an option for her. Barbara paused to collect her thoughts. After a moment she went on. Sometimes I wonder if her poor response to cancer treatment was because she unconsciously wanted to die, or was intentionally undermining her treatment. Anyway, I was with her when she passed away. The official story says Dad was in court winning a murder conviction. In reality, he had the doctor change the time of death while he was at his assistant's apartment celebrating. He paraded Mom as his trophy, and the media loved the story of the heroic DA saving the battered woman. He even hit her a few times that I saw. Why are you telling me this? I asked, feeling confused. Because you don't deserve this, Hogan. My dad is a terrible person. After Mom died, he kept his affairs quiet until I went to college. That's when he started having these meetings at the house. They're not just for work. He also holds them for charity groups he's involved with. I know he's involved with 2 other women from those groups. One of them even thinks it's true love and plans to leave her husband. Is that what Ashley believes? I inquired, even though I was already pretty sure of the answer. Barbara shook her head. No, she seems to think it's just fun. They say power is the greatest aphrodisiac, and Ashley seems to prove that. I overheard her talking to my dad about a senator they met with, and how excited she was when she returned to Doylestown. The bluntness of her comment made me wince. I remembered that night well. I'd come home to an incredibly passionate wife, and it had been one of the best nights of closeness in my life. That memory was now tainted because I realized my wife had probably been thinking about someone else. What do you want from me? I asked. Barbara met my gaze firmly as she replied. My goal is to get you out of your marriage to that cheater and ruin my father's career so he couldn't get elected even as a dog catcher in a town full of cats. I considered leaking this information to the press or the opposition, but he has too many connections. I think if we work together we can make them pay. Won't that complicate your schooling? I asked. She tossed her deep red hair as she shook her head. No, my mom left me a trust fund. I haven't used it yet, but if necessary I could cover the rest of my education, and even get an MBA while still having a nice sum left over. Why didn't your mom use that money to leave and go to Ireland where your dad couldn't reach her? Barbara's expression turned troubled. She was raised in a very strict Irish Catholic environment. She was taught that divorce was not an option. No matter what happened, she stuck to her faith until the end. I think this is why I believe her death might have been more about a lack of will to live rather than a deliberate choice, as self-ending was seen as an unforgivable sin in her view. Barbara appeared genuinely sincere, and her desire to ruin her father's career seemed genuine. With the information I had, it looked like she was committed to this cause. There didn't seem to be any trap here. If Ashley and Paul wanted to ruin me, they could do it openly in court. This kind of sneaky behavior was only for someone who was desperate like me. A plan began to form in my mind. I would need Barbara's help with several aspects. At the very least, this would show how serious she was about taking down her father. All right, I said, but I don't want to use these photos or even mention him in my divorce. Barbara looked taken aback. Why not? She asked, her face reddening with emotion as she prepared to argue. I stopped her with a raised hand. I'm not saying we won't go after him, but I want to avoid the negative publicity of being the betrayed husband in a political scandal. Instead, I want to dismantle his power and influence so I can get a quiet divorce without drawing unwanted attention. Barbara looked at me, clearly surprised. A moment later, a cunning smile appeared on her face. What do you need me to do? I grinned. I'm going to use my skills. Get me access to his financial records, both personal and campaign related. Capone was caught through tax evasion, and I'm sure I can find something in your father's files. If I can't find anything, what then? She asked. I smirked. I'll create some evidence myself. In the following 3 days, Barbara and I were hard at work. She installed a keylogger on both her father's personal laptop and the home desktop. Additionally, she backed up the entire hard drive of his computer. We configured their security system to upload its footage to a cloud storage I knew about, hosted overseas. It was quite convenient that he had set up so many cameras in his own house. As for me, I didn't bother tapping into Ashley's phone. With the evidence Barbara provided, I didn't need anything else. I did, however, set up a GPS tracker designed for parents to monitor their children. It used cell towers for general positioning but could be activated for precise tracking. I just wanted to avoid any surprises at home while I was working. The day after Barbara's visit, I pretended to have a groin injury. This gave me a reason to avoid having closeness with my wife. I never thought I'd need an excuse to avoid intimacy with my beloved wife. Given the number of Paul's affairs, I wasn't willing to take any more risks. Besides, I probably couldn't have done it without letting my anger show. I scheduled an appointment with a doctor to get tested for STDs.